Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The body of 22-year-old Katie Sepich was discovered dead on the morning of August 31, 2003, next to a distant dump in the Las Cruces, New Mexico desert, last spotted by pals departing a nearby house party following a night of going out to bars. Her mother characterized her killer as a 22-year-old lady who was loud, lively, and intelligent. It would take almost 4 years to identify her. Carlsbad, New Mexico is where she was raised. Out of her 3 siblings, she was the eldest. After graduating from New Mexico State University with a business degree, Katie planned to enroll in graduate school to earn an MBA in the fall. She was employed at a nearby Mexican restaurant as a waitress. Katie was an extremely gregarious individual. She met Joe Bischoff while she was a student at the institution. They soon developed a more romantic relationship from their friendly one. Katie expressed her happiness with Joe to her mother, Diane. When Joe offered Katie a diamond ring a few months later, Katie understood that her dream of building a future with him could actually come true. There were issues in their relationship after Katie and Joe graduated from college in the summer of 2003. Joe went back to live with his parents in Gallup, New Mexico, a little town roughly 350 miles from Las Cruces, while Katie chose to continue her education at the university. Joe's departure caused Katie a great deal of distress. Even though their long-distance relationship was intolerable, they occasionally managed to get together. When Joe visited Las Cruces over Labor Day weekend in 2003, Katie was ecstatic. But their weekend together ended tragically. The date was August 30, 2003, a Saturday. After having a good time with Joe and his friends, Katie went from bar to bar until they arrived at a house party in the area, where she vanished. Katie's mother, Ann, had a call the following day that permanently altered her life. "My family woke up to the promise of a beautiful day. We had a house bursting with friends and family, and we were preparing to celebrate Labor Day weekend with a cookout. Then, at 2:15 that afternoon, the phone rang, and our lives were shattered with just 6 words. Have you talked to Katie today?" Ann later wrote about the morning she learned her daughter had vanished on August 31, 2003. "My daughter Katie was brilliant, lively, vocal, and amazing. Our firstborn Katie brought joy and sunshine into every space. Her roommate wanted to know where she was, so he called. Even the nearby hospitals and all of her friends had been contacted, but Katie was nowhere to be found." Ann was informed by Katie's roommate, Veronica, that Katie had left the party by herself that evening. In the house where the party was being held, Veronica and Joe dozed off. Katie was nowhere to be seen in the morning, despite their belief that she had gone home. Her relatives reported the disappearance to the police. A half-naked woman's body was found near to a desert landfill at the same time. The police officers who arrived at the scene came to the conclusion that the body had been laying there for little more than a day based on the exterior evidence, even though there were no documents close to it. Additionally, they recognized right away that the victim's death was not due to an accident. The victim looked to be between 20 and 25 years old. Since she was completely nude, the motivation behind this crime was clear. Her arms bore wounds from self-defense. She was scratching the assailant in an attempt to save her life. Under her fingernails were bits of the criminal's skin. Thus, the DNA sample of the individual who killed her was in the possession of the police. Her neck showed evidence of strangulation, which initially appeared to be the most likely cause of death. Since there were no indications of a struggle close to the body, the detectives were able to determine that the young woman passed away elsewhere. In the hopes that it would take a long time for someone to find her, the criminal apparently transferred her remains to the isolated desert landfill. The victim's back and arms had burn marks, which was another startling discovery. It suggested that the offender set the victim on fire in an attempt to get rid of the body or destroy any evidence. The police made a rapid connection between the body of a young lady they discovered and Katie's disappearance. Diane, Katie's mother, said of the body when her father visited the morgue to identify it, "A few agonizing hours later, our worst fears were realized. There are no words to describe the agony, no way to express the pain. We fell into a deep black hole with no way out. There was no tomorrow, all joy was gone." In order to identify his cherished daughter, Katie's father had to visit the mortuary. He later told me that he knelt down and prayed to God to take him, as well as they peeled back the sheet, and he saw her lovely face twisted in agony and bruised. The people who lived in the formerly tranquil town of Las Cruces were afraid. Katie's experience was horrifying. Since there was no assurance that the offender would not conduct another crime, the police made every effort to apprehend them as quickly as possible. When the police started looking into Katie's case, their initial goal was to learn as much as they could about her final hours, including where she was, who she was with, what she was doing, whether she had any enemies, and whether she had argued with anyone. The house where Katie lived was roughly a mile away from the location of the party. The investigators first spoke with her roommate Veronica and her boyfriend Joe in order to determine whether or not she had arrived at her house. The fact that these two remained at the party while Katie went home by herself in the middle of the night appeared odd. Joe didn't seem interested in helping the cops. He said that Katie had departed, leaving behind her keys, phone, and purse. The investigators began examining Katie's path. In an attempt to gather hints, they interrogated the locals as they went from door to door. Unfortunately, though, it was ineffective. Nobody heard or saw anything. Based on one discovery, it was assumed that Katie arrived at her residence but never entered. She departed without her keys, in case you forgot. After looking throughout the property, the investigator discovered Katie's shoes outside her bedroom window. Someone apparently attacked her as she attempted to enter the residence through the window. This was further supported by footprints found in the gravel around the home. Although Katie battled for her life, the assailant ultimately proved to be more formidable. The investigators hypothesized that the offender transported Katie to the desert landfill and attempted to burn her after killing her. They began to wonder, was it someone she knew and trusted, or was it a complete stranger? There were maybe 40 people at the gathering. Perhaps Katie was attacked by someone who followed her home. Is this someone who might be her boyfriend? These were the questions the investigators sought to answer. After interviewing all of the guests, they learned one important element that Joe had forgotten to include. Katie reportedly witnessed Joe kissing another girl, according to many witnesses. They later witnessed them fighting. That's why Katie went home by herself and left her handbag behind. She wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible since she was upset. On the other hand, Joe made no mention of it during his initial police interview. Additionally, he kept it a secret from Katie's parents, who were curious as to why Katie had left that party unaccompanied. Joe was questioned once more by the investigators. Joe acknowledged that it was true when they told him that they knew he and Katie had argued because Katie had witnessed him kissing another female. He claims that he drove after Katie when she went home. Joe allegedly pulled up to her house, but he didn't enter. He thought she was already asleep when he noticed the light in her bedroom was off, so he went back to the party. As a result, Joe was not there at the party when Katie was attacked. When Joe returned, none of the people the detective spoke to could say for sure. He most likely had enough time to carry out the crime, transport Katie's corpse to the desert, and then head back to the celebration. After speaking with witnesses, the detectives learned of yet another odd detail. Joe went back to the party and began phoning Katie's cell phone, housed in her purse. When he heard Katie's phone ring, he located it. Even though Joe knew it was Katie's phone, he kept phoning her till dawn. Where did that come from? Perhaps he was attempting to give himself an excuse. Maybe he wanted to seem worried about his sweetheart. Joe didn't want to speak to the police anymore, but the detectives wanted him to explain his odd conduct. Joe did not even attend Katie's burial, which increased suspicion despite Katie's deep love for him. However, Joe's DNA sample was all that was required for the authorities to rule him out of the pool of possible suspects. 3 distinct locations on Katie's body had DNA samples, according to experts. It was mostly beneath her fingernails. The skin was human. The samples that were discovered on Katie's body were all from the same individual. There were issues with the police's plan to compare Joe's DNA with the DNA discovered on Katie's body. His parents hired a lawyer while Joe was out of town, and the lawyer told the investigators that Joe had declined to give a DNA sample. Given Joe's actions, it was obvious to everyone that he had a secret and was involved in Katie's demise. To verify this, the authorities had to figure out a legal way to get his DNA, which took time. Meanwhile, different versions were being considered by the investigators. They were investigating related instances to see whether Katie was the only victim of the person who killed her. When DNA samples discovered on her body were compared to a national database, no matches were identified. The investigators made the decision to go back to the party, which was the beginning of it all. All of the guys who were present at that party were identified, and they were requested to submit a DNA sample. Since none of the men had anything to conceal, they all agreed. But the DNA that was discovered on Katie's body did not match, which led the investigators back to Joe. The only person who declined to give his DNA was him. However, the detectives managed to obtain it in a different way. They discovered that Joe and Katie had made sexual contact in her bedroom before tending the party. The police were correct when they went to the residence and removed the sheet from Katie's bed in the hopes of finding Joe's DNA there. Although a male DNA sample was discovered by the lab, it did not correspond to the one discovered on Katie's body. It indicated that she had not been attacked by Joe. If he had nothing to do with his girlfriend's fate, why did he refuse to assist the police? Joe's attorney received the test results from the police. Joe made the decision to speak with the police once more and give a sample of his DNA after finding out that he had been taken off the list of suspects. The first conclusion, that Joe was not involved in this crime, was validated by the new test. When asked why he wouldn't help the police, Joe explained that he was worried they might find his DNA on Katie's body because he and Katie had had sexual contact prior to the party. The police and Katie's family were still unsure of Joe's actions the night of Katie's death. The police had to search for alternative versions when Joe was removed from the suspect list. Investigators were informed by a number of partygoers that Katie was wearing rings on her fingers that evening, including the one Joe had given her, but Katie's fingers had no rings on them when her body was found. The police thought the person who killed her had taken them away. They searched every pawn shop in the neighborhood but were unable to locate Katie's jewelry. Tire traces close to where Katie's body was discovered could also be a clue. The tire's model and brand were determined by the experts. Police were told by the manufacturer that these tires were typically found on pickup trucks. Sadly, it did not advance the search for the perpetrator, and the investigation came to a standstill. A year or so later, someone in Wisconsin committed a crime that was strikingly identical to Katie's experience. In Green Bay, a girl was attacked and subjected to the same treatment as Katie. Luckily, the sufferer survived despite being set on fire as well. She said to the police that the only reason she survived was because she feigned to be dead. She extinguished the fire and went to a neighboring house for assistance after the perpetrators had fled. She claimed that 2 Hispanic men had attacked her, but all the evidence in Katie's case pointed to just one individual. To verify or disprove the link between the 2 crimes, DNA analysis was required. The Wisconsin victim gave the authorities a detailed account of how the males who attacked her looked. One of the farmers identified Gregorio Morales and Juan Nieto, his employees, in the sketches when the Green Bay police released them. One of them frequently traveled to Las Cruces to visit relatives. Both males were taken into custody. The police who were looking into Katie's case thought they had finally identified the criminal. But the DNA analysis's findings showed otherwise. The DNA on Katie's body did not match the samples. These 2 men had nothing to do with the Katie case, but they were eventually found guilty of abusing a female in Green Bay. Morales received a 50-year sentence, and Nieto received a 70-year sentence. The detectives thus came to yet another dead end. Tire tracks from the crime scene and the offender's DNA samples were the only pieces of evidence the police had. The authorities had issues identifying the individual who killed their daughter, despite Katie's family's anticipation that DNA would help them identify the culprit. Taking a DNA sample from someone who had been apprehended by the police was illegal. Diane, Katie's mom, will put it the following: "Later, we had lost our daughter to a monster and we needed justice. We needed to know who had done this and why. But most of all, we needed to know that he would be stopped from doing this again. There were no real clues. The detective in charge of Katie's case told me that the only evidence they had was DNA. You see, Katie had fought so hard for her life that the blood and skin of her killer had been found underneath her fingernails. A DNA profile had been extracted and uploaded into the National Forensic Database called CODIS. Detective Jones explained that once a week, this evidence would be cross-referenced against the offender database to look for a match. This gave our family bright hope. We had the identity of our daughter's murderer. We just had to match it to a name. I casually said that this man was so monstrous that he would undoubtedly be caught for a new offense. We would identify him, apprehend him, and bring him to court when his cheek was swabbed and entered into the database. "Oh no, Diane, it doesn't work that way here in New Mexico, and in almost every other state. It's illegal to take DNA when someone is arrested." Detective Jones said that, and I must admit that I was taken aback. I was aware that fingerprints and a photo are taken of an individual upon arrest. However, was it unlawful to identify the horrible monsters who are pursuing and killing our children using the most precise and cutting-edge scientific instrument available? This case was interrupted on December 18, 2006, 3.5 years after Katie's passing. A DNA sample that matched the DNA on Katie's body was discovered by the lab. Gabriel Avila, age 26, was the man who assaulted Katie. He didn't know Katie and was a married father. In addition to his lengthy criminal history, he was freed from prison just before Katie died, on November 13, 2003, less than 3 months after killing her with brutality. After using a knife to break into the residence of 2 young women, Avila was taken into custody. The college roommates called 911 and locked themselves in the bathroom to prevent an attack. In March 2004, he was found guilty of aggravated burglary and with intent to conduct aggravated assault. However, the Albuquerque Journal claims that Avila fled when he was freed on bond. Due to a flaw in the system, Avila's involvement in Katie's death was finally discovered 3.5 years after the incident, even though he might have been arrested as soon as 3 months later. Before being caught, in November 2004 on a tip, the fugitive eluded law enforcement for almost a year. He received a 9-year prison sentence. Avila's DNA sample was collected while she was incarcerated, but it wasn't tested for another 2 years. Investigators moved swiftly to find the truck Avila used to dispose of Katie's body, after the results showed a partial match to DNA recovered from her crime scene. They discovered Katie's ring in the middle console. This instance demonstrated the necessity for systemic reform. If the police had obtained Avila's DNA sample at the time of his initial arrest, they may have nabbed him much sooner, saving them time and money during their 3-year search for the criminal. The fact that a sample of his DNA was examined in 2006, just 2 years later, is also unexpected. To speak with Avila, the investigators looking into Katie's case visited the prison. He admitted that he had committed this act after discovering Katie's ring in his pickup truck. He claimed that while his wife was away that evening, he was in the area purchasing illegal substances. He asked Katie if she needed a lift when he saw her. "No," she replied. Then, in front of her house, he saw her once more. Avila explained, "I stopped and asked her if she needed help. She goes, 'I just can't get into my house. I don't have my purse.' Katie wanted to get into her bedroom through the window, but Avila attacked her and started undressing her, and you of course understand what happened after. After that, Avila didn't know what to do and decided to strangle Katie. He was afraid that she would identify him later. She put up a little bit of a fight, and for some reason, I decided I was going to strangle her. Had my hands around her, I locked and I couldn't let go," Avila said. Katie's body was then placed on the ground in a desert waste after he loaded her into his pickup vehicle. He was mistaken to believe that burning her body would eliminate all the evidence. When DNA evidence was discovered on Katie's body, a retake of Avila's DNA sample revealed a match. Her parents hoped it would result in a speedy investigation in 2003, but taking DNA after an arrest was forbidden in New Mexico and almost every other state. Only those convicted and imprisoned had their DNA added to the system. Katie's parents launched a national effort to have a law passed in each of the 50 states bearing their daughter's name, forcing anyone detained for a violent crime to provide a DNA sample. After that, the DNA would be included in the National CODIS database. Katie's bill was signed into law in March 2006 after passing the New Mexico state legislature with just 5 nay votes. It became federal law in 2010 as a result of Katie's parents' unwavering efforts, and more than 31 states now have laws that are comparable to Katie's law in New Mexico. According to Katie's father, David, his greatest worry was that Katie's killer would have to kill someone else. However, he may now relax about that fear. Opponents claim that this regulation violates civil rights and infringes on privacy. Others remark that DNA is very different from fingerprints in the U.S. because it carries sensitive genetic information. In the case of versus Poole, a federal district court affirmed that there is no constitutional infringement of the federal statute permitting the gathering of DNA samples prior to conviction for inclusion in the National DNA Database. The court explicitly said in its decision that the collecting does not constitute a Fourth Amendment infringement. In 2007, Gabriel Avila's trial got underway. Avila expressed regret to Katie's relatives. His attorney claimed Avila was sorry and asked the judge to be forgiving. Susana Martinez, the district attorney, contended that Avila did not confess until officers approached him with DNA evidence, more than 3 years after the murder. David, Katie's father, pleaded with the judge to impose a severe penalty during the sentencing hearing. He said, "We do not get another chance to see her in this life, and it is only right that the person who did this to her not get a chance to experience freedom again in his life." Gabriel Avila was convicted in May 2007 and given a 69-year jail term. He will serve 30 years of his sentence before being eligible for release in about 2043. Jan stated that although she is prepared to move on, there is no such thing as closure. "We've been healing. We've been going forward with our lives. We have 2 other incredible children we love so much," Jan added. In honor of their daughter, Jan also promised that she and her husband would keep pushing for the passage of Katie's Law in each of the 50 states. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Keyshawn Mann, a 13-year-old boy, made the horrific 911 call that you heard. The Kentwood-dwelling child had a rather startling encounter. He was casually relaxing on the basement couch on January 25, 2010, when an unthinkable incident occurred. They heard someone approaching and the horrifying sound of a gunshot. His father had been shot while using his laptop, and his lifeless body lay on the floor. No youngster should ever have to see such a terrible and painful event. What secrets and ulterior intentions drove the man to be brutally murdered in his own house? How did the police resolve the case in the end? We'll examine Keyshawn Mann's convoluted case today. On January 25, 2010, this case brought us to Kentwood, a quiet town with a population of about 54,000 people, tucked away in a beautiful environment and renowned for its calm attitude and close-knit community. It provides a delightful fusion of natural beauty and suburban living. Kentwood offers a warm atmosphere for both families and single people, with its tree-lined lanes and amiable locals. Despite its peaceful exterior, Kentwood conceals a number of secrets that will soon be revealed. Everyone appeared to be going about their everyday lives as usual in the town of Kentwood on January 25, 2010. However, the police department was notified by an unexpected 911 call around 6 p.m. The initial caller sounded frightened, as though a horrible incident had occurred. His voice betrayed the fact that he was a scared teen in dire need of assistance. They had no idea that this upsetting call was only the start of a bizarre and startling chain of events. The police began questioning people in an effort to learn more specifics about what had happened. The police were aware that the victim might have attempted suicide despite the confusion. They thus made an effort to verify their suspicion. The cops wanted to speak with an older person to gain more specific information because the call was becoming intense, and they needed to know what had truly transpired. Given that he had previously stated that everyone was present, it seemed odd that no one was home all of a sudden. The individual began to express a troubling suspicion that he had at the time of his father's passing. When he rushed upstairs after hearing the noises of someone racing from upstairs, he discovered his father's lifeless body and a scene of bloodshed. Amidst their astonishment and perplexity, a question persisted in everyone's consciousness. If the father wasn't the one fleeing, then who was, and where had he disappeared to? The cops hurried to the 5800 block of Pine Vista Street in Kentwood as soon as the call ended. Keyshawn Mann, a 13-year-old boy who had courageously contacted out to report his father's death, met them when they arrived. He was accompanied by his 2 younger siblings. One of them was 8 years old and the other 12. Fear and despair were mixed together in Keyshawn Mann's eyes. He described to the police the horrific events that transpired, including how he heard a gunshot and hurried upstairs to discover his father, 35-year-old Jermel Stokes, dead within seconds. Blood was scattered around the room, making the crime scene a terrifying image. After quickly securing the location, the police started to investigate Jermel's body. At the rear of his skull, they discovered a bullet wound. Interestingly, his body showed no further bruises or indications of violence. This implied that the murderer's only goal was to take Jermel's life without inflicting more damage or violence. The murderer believed his mission was accomplished and departed the area as soon as he had shot him. The detectives observed something strange as they closely inspected the wound. The wound from the shooting was bigger than what they usually saw. This information implied that the murderer had discharged the weapon very close, almost at point-blank range. It became clear that Jermel was deeply engaged in his work on the laptop at the dining room counter, oblivious to the imminent threat. Since Jermel made no move to flee or protect himself, it was suspected that the murderer might have been someone he knew. Victims typically attempt to defend themselves out of reflex when faced with such closeness. This paved the way for an inquiry to reveal the facts about this heartbreaking and unsettling crime. In an effort to uncover any clues the murderer may have left behind, the police inspected the residence and the whole crime scene. They found 2 handguns when they searched Jermel's room's cabinet. Although they thought both firearms were Jermel's, one of them looked unsettling because it had traces of gunpowder and a missing bullet, indicating it had been shot lately. The other rifle looked undamaged and was loaded. This sparked suspicions because it didn't seem likely that the murderer would have had time to place the gun back in the closet before departing if he had used it to murder Jermel. Keyshawn Mann's claim that Jermel was gunless during the 911 call raised additional doubts. The detectives questioned how Keyshawn Mann could have been so certain that Jermel was armed. In an attempt to find any evidence that would provide them with information about the predator, the rifle was sent for testing right away. At that point, Lakeisha Mann, Jermel's fiancée and Keyshawn Mann's mother, came home after hearing of Jermel's passing. Despite being in the same town, the fiancé took a long time to return home, which the police thought was odd. If the spouses learn of their partner's death, they typically return quickly. In an attempt to learn more about Jermel's past, potential enemies, or any clues as to who might be responsible for his death, the investigators made the decision to question her, but she said she didn't know anything about his past. It was discovered that Keyshawn Mann was Jermel's stepchild rather than his biological kid. The investigators felt as though something was being hidden because of the contradictory responses and unclear facts. They understood that they needed to learn more about the family's history. According to the authorities, Keyshawn Mann's mother had a tumultuous divorce from his father, her first spouse. But the public was not privy to the specifics of their relationship. She was a single mother who yearned for respect and love, which is how she met Jermel Stokes. He became her son's friend and father figure, especially Keyshawn Mann. Lakeisha and her 3 sons quickly moved in with Jermel after they made the decision to advance their relationship. However, Jermel already had children from several different women. According to paternity and child support paperwork, he had 4 and 9-year-old children with one lady, 10 with another, and 11 and 12 with a third. According to state police records, Jermel was previously charged with a felony in 1993 for carrying a concealed weapon. In 2003, he also entered a guilty plea to a misdemeanor charge of taser possession. Aiming for a new beginning and a blended family, Jermel started a new chapter in his life with Lakeisha and her 3 sons, despite his difficult past. His new family life appeared to be going smoothly. Jermel tried to build a close relationship with Keyshawn Mann as a stepfather, despite the fact that he was not his biological child. He filled the vacuum created by Keyshawn Mann's biological father's absence by acting as a father figure. Since there had been no prior reports or information indicating any problems or conflicts, there were no signs of any troubles inside the family. At first, the police inquiry into Jermel Stokes' murder revealed no background or apparent reason that could account for the terrible incident. No suspicious information or hints regarding the family were discovered. The case was obviously mysterious because no one was a suspect, even if it wasn't immediately apparent. Detective Mattis couldn't get rid of the idea that every murder must have a purpose. Even though the detectives first ruled out the family's involvement, they were ignorant of the harsher facts and hidden secrets that were concealed beneath the surface of their seemingly ideal family. The police turned their attention to identifying the person who might have killed Jermel out of a personal grievance or motivation. First, they asked the neighbors whether they could remember anything out of the ordinary or if they had witnessed someone fleeing the residence on the night of January 25, 2010. Still in shock after the terrible incident, the neighbors acknowledged hearing a gunshot but did not see anyone running away. In an attempt to find more leads, the police continued to question Jermel's acquaintances and family, but they were unsuccessful. It was difficult for the detectives to accuse anyone because there were no obvious hints to follow, no evidence left behind, and no signs of blood or fingerprints at the crime site. The stunning fact that left everyone startled was finally revealed by the firearms testing findings. His own stepson, Keyshawn Mann, had fingerprints on the gun that killed Jermel. Those who knew the family well were shaken by the unexpected news. Since Keyshawn Mann had been the one to phone the police in distress to report his father's shooting, this discovery provided a confusing twist to the case. The difficult challenge of figuring out the reasons behind this sudden change in circumstances now lay before them. With reference to Keyshawn Mann's 911 call, the police started to piece the puzzle together. At first, Keyshawn Mann said that everyone was seated on the couch when the murder occurred, suggesting that the family was present at the time. However, when authorities asked to talk with an elder member of the family, nobody was home, which caused suspicion. The police came at a conclusion based on these discrepancies. They thought that Keyshawn Mann saw the ideal chance to execute his plan on January 25, 2010, just before 6 p.m. when his mother was out. Silently, he took his gun out of the cabinet, fired at his father, and put it back where it belonged. Unaware that his decision to put the gun back would be used as strong evidence against him, he called the police in a panic and fear to report the murder of his father. They had not yet learned the reason behind Jermel's murder, though. To gain a better understanding of what transpired on the night of the murder, the police went back to the residence on Pine Vista Street in Kentwood and spoke with Keyshawn Mann in a different room. To their astonishment, Keyshawn Mann acknowledged that he had been playing with the rifle. When they asked him directly if he had killed Jermel, he clarified that he called the police because he was so terrified after inadvertently pulling the trigger. But something wasn't quite right. Keyshawn Mann had disputed that there was a gun in the house when the 911 call was made. However, after speaking with him, it became evident that something was off. Why would he confess to playing with a pistol after initially denying possessing one? The police didn't think it was an accident. They thought Keyshawn Mann killed his father on purpose. However, they chose to consult a licensed psychiatrist in order to speak with him because of his youth. They recognized that he might have taken such a severe action as a child due to underlying concerns or motives. When he was questioned about why he killed his stepfather during the therapy session, the other side of the story came to light. Behind the joys and the seemingly ideal family, there was more. Keyshawn Mann talked candidly about Jermel Stokes' torture and abuse of him and his family. He disclosed that if Jermel was upset or for the smallest of reasons, he would regularly beat him, his mother, and his brothers. Keyshawn Mann felt stuck with no way out and wanted to shield his mother and siblings from the constant torment. He thought that getting rid of Jermel, his stepfather, was the only way to solve the problem. He told the therapist about the horrific ways that Jermel had mistreated his mother, including putting a finger down her neck. He also described how, when his mother wasn't there, Jermel would hit him and his siblings with a paint stick. When Jermel choked him, Keyshawn Mann talked about how he was able to get away from him. Keyshawn Mann's intense love for his mother served as the fuel for his hatred of Jermel. He could no longer stand to watch his mother be abused by Jermel. Keyshawn Mann made the painful choice to take his own life with one of Jermel's own firearms because the anguish of seeing his mother mistreated him grew intolerable. Perhaps as a result of some unidentified factors influencing his mother's prior divorce, this young child had already experienced a great deal in his life. But this time, Keyshawn Mann had reached his breaking point, which led him to perpetrate a heinous crime. This terrible story was made all the more fascinating by the depths of motivations and emotions. It was determined to send Keyshawn Mann to the circuit court for trial in June 2010 due to his young age of 13. This made him one of the youngest in the state to be put on trial for murder, and the youngest in Kentwood County. Keyshawn Mann confessed to killing his stepfather, Jermel Stokes, according to the Kentwood police detective in the courtroom. Keyshawn Mann acknowledged stealing Jermel's unlicensed silver handgun from a cupboard during the trial. He had checked the rifle by taking out and reinstalling the clip, so he knew it was loaded. Keyshawn Mann acknowledged that he did approach Jermel from behind when his attorney, Fred Johnson, questioned him about it. Keyshawn Mann responded with another yes when Johnson asked a pivotal question. You understood that pulling the trigger could result in someone's death. This made it abundantly evident that the shooting was not an accident because he had previously abused his mother. A close friend of Keyshawn Mann from Park Ridge Academy, whose name was kept secret because of his youth, appeared in court as a witness prepared to make shocking disclosures. He informed the jurors that Keyshawn Mann had brought a firearm to high school on January 25, 2010. He told him about his plans and showed him the gun. A 21-page report from the Children's Trauma Assessment Center was shown in court. It included information from Keyshawn Mann's therapy sessions in which he confessed to the crime and disclosed the shocking cause behind it. The therapist claims that Keyshawn Mann felt that the only option to shield himself and his family from serious abuse and possible harm was to kill Jermell. According to the therapist, Keyshawn Mann's experience was brought on by a home setting that was occasionally chaotic and dangerous, as well as ongoing exposure to intense violence. Even the mother of Keyshawn Mann admitted that she occasionally worried that Jermell might murder her or her boys. Fred Johnson, Keyshawn Mann's attorney, stated that he believes the shooting was mostly caused by the domestic violence that was allegedly occurring in the home. He thought the therapist's conclusions, though, were arbitrary and might not be solid enough for the trial. He made it clear that Keyshawn Mann was afraid, worried about his mother, and felt guilty. According to Johnson, Keyshawn Mann knew the effect his acts had on his mother and sincerely regretted them. Since there had been no previous calls to the police or Child Protective Services about the family's abuse, the police and prosecutors questioned the validity of the evaluation report. According to police interviews, discipline in the home was imposed by Keyshawn Mann's mother, Lakeisha Mann, wearing t-shirts that said "Beloved Melly," a nickname for Jermell. Some of his relatives denied that he had ever mistreated Lakeisha Mann or the children. Did no one know whether there had been abuse? And secrets of that nature don't remain that way in the closet. Jose Moore, JL's uncle, rejected the allegations as baseless. Investigators were unable to determine a specific motive for the crime, according to Kent County Prosecutor Bill Forsyth. Everyone concerned found it uncomfortable because there was no recognized motive for the murder. After hearing the case and carefully weighing all the evidence, Judge Daniel Zemaitis found Keyshawn Mann guilty of second-degree murder for the death of Jermell Stokes and sentenced him to serve the next 8 years until he turns 21 at the Muskegon River Youth Home, a juvenile facility about 110 miles from Grand Rapids. Keyshawn Mann would be released in 2018 if he finished this term, but there was also a chance that he would receive a different punishment, one that would involve transferring him to an adult jail for at least 162 months or life. Some of Jermell's family members were unhappy with the proposed agreement because they believed Keyshawn Mann's sentence was not harsh enough. Keyshawn Stokes, Jermell's sister, said that she thought Keyshawn Mann should be sentenced to 35 years in jail because her brother was 35 years old. Justice, in her opinion, was not being done. Annette Moore, Jermell's aunt, also expressed her belief that Keyshawn Mann's return to normal life was an unfair decision. She didn't think Keyshawn Mann was mistreated, but she did think he committed a significant offense and should be sentenced as an adult. Moore expressed her displeasure with the current sentence's fairness, but since the verdict had already been rendered and could not be overturned, acceptance was the only option. But 3 years later, on February 13, 2013, 16-year-old Keyshawn Mann showed up in court for a progress report on his stay at the Muskegon River Youth Home. He was performing better than the facility average, according to reports. He was able to go to counseling sessions and classes while he was in a guarded area. On a scale of 1 to 5, the youth home's officials gave his performance a 4 and observed that he was improving significantly. They even noted that Keyshawn Mann had demonstrated suitable coping mechanisms by managing his emotions, disappointments, and rage in a constructive way. During his brief court appearance, Keyshawn Mann apologized for his behavior and thanked his family for their support. He made a big mistake, he admitted, and he made it clear that he was determined to learn from it. According to his lawyer Johnson, Keyshawn Mann was committed to giving it his all no matter what. Keyshawn Mann was scheduled to complete college credit classes after graduating from the youth home educational program as a junior. As 21-year-old Keyshawn Mann celebrated his birthday and his release from the Muskegon River Youth Home on December 6, 2017, after serving more than 7 years in prison for second-degree murder, birthday balloons floated in the Kent County courtroom. Keyshawn Mann was released. Keyshawn Mann was granted his freedom by Judge Daniel Zamatis, who was supervising his progress at the periodic review sessions. At the final hearing, the judge spoke to Keyshawn Mann and said he was certain he was ready to start a new chapter of achievement in the community. When the judge gave the announcement, Keyshawn Mann and his mother Lakeisha exchanged heartfelt embraces as friends and family crowded the courtroom. Vicky Seidel, the assistant prosecutor for Kent County, commended Keyshawn Mann for setting a good example for other youth in the program. She claimed that he had carried out his duties and characterized him as an example for the inmates. For almost 18 months, Keyshawn Mann had been enrolled in online courses at Mid-Michigan Community College. According to his family, he had plans to continue his education, possibly attending Grand Rapids Community College in 2017. Kent County Probation Officer Dan Corey reports that Keyshawn Mann's meeting with his father, Jermel Stokes, to resolve the matter went smoothly. Mr. Stokes said he hoped Keyshawn Mann would have a fruitful life. Though it had been a tough 7 years, Keyshawn Mann agreed that his life had significantly improved. He conveyed his appreciation for the chance to improve himself, given that Keyshawn Mann was only a small boy at the time. Jermel's aunt also pardoned him for his behavior. She felt that Keyshawn Mann should be given the opportunity to start over, since she understood that his actions were motivated by fear. How do you feel about this case? Do you believe Keyshawn Mann should have been given another chance? And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. 3 young lads chose to go hiking near Wadsworth Park, northwest of Great Falls, Montana, on January 3, 1956, which is when this horrific event began. They discovered a car parked between 2 trees with its motor still running while they were strolling down a dusty road. To their surprise, they found a dead body. 5 miles outside of Great Falls, on Vineyard Road, the police discovered another lifeless person the next day, with secrets and ominous tales that plagued Great Falls for years. This enigmatic incident gave rise to myths and conjecture surrounding the case. What sinister secrets were concealed in the lives of the victims? Would we ever know the truth? We'll examine the convoluted case of Patricia Kalitsky and Dwayne Bogle today. Montana's Great Falls is a city renowned for its lively people and breathtaking scenery. The Great Falls of the Missouri, a group of waterfalls on the Missouri River, are the inspiration behind the city's name. With attractions like Giant Springs State Park and the River's Edge Trail, the city offers a blend of urban conveniences and scenic beauty. This is where the story for today is set. Let's begin at the very beginning, though. On January 18, 1937, Dwayne Bogle was born in Waco, Texas. Albuquerque Walker and James George Bogle Jr., his parents, embraced him. Dwayne was a Waco High School graduate who was loved by his family for his wonderful sense of humor and endearing demeanor. Fortunately, Dwayne's path led him to the United States Air Force in 1955, youthful and ambitious. It was probably his first job after finishing technical school and basic training. For 8 months, he served as an airman second class at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, which is close to the picturesque town of Great Falls. He had no idea that he would meet Patricia Kalitsky, the love of his life, while he was there. She was a junior at Great Falls High School when she was born on August 20, 1939, in the tiny town of Great Falls. She always had a large smile on her face and was regarded by her classmates as amusing, compassionate, and energetic. Patricia appeared to be gifted in anything she tried, including tap and ballet dancing. 18-year-old Dwayne and 16-year-old Patricia met in December 1955. They both loved to sing and dance, and as luck would have it, Dwayne fell deeply in love with Patricia while he was sent at Malmstrom. Even though they had only known one another for a few weeks, they clicked right away and dreamed of a future together since they couldn't bear to be apart. Dwayne was embraced by Patricia's family, and he even spent Christmas 1955 staying with them and participating in their celebrations. With great excitement and anticipation, Dwayne and Patricia set off on their trek to Wadsworth Park on that memorable day, January 2, 1956. Brimming with anticipation for their first journey together as a couple, They bid farewell to their relatives. They had no idea that their journey would soon take an unexpected turn that would permanently change their lives. Although they had intended to get home by 9 p.m., Patricia's parents became more and more worried as the hours passed. Patricia, who was renowned for being accountable and on time, had not returned by her customary curfew of 10 p.m. In a panic, Patricia's parents contacted her older sister in the hopes of finding out where she was, but she was nowhere to be found. They searched well-known spots where Patricia enjoyed spending her time, but she was still evasive. They began to worry about the prospect that Patricia might have eloped with Duane, just like her sister. As their search became more frantic, they hesitantly accepted the idea that history might be repeating itself, because they had already felt the anguish of betrayal from their older daughter, who had eloped with her lover years prior. Uncertain if Patricia had voluntarily disappeared or if anything more nefarious had happened, they were afraid of the worst but were also troubled by their previous heartbreak, so they were reluctant to call the police. 3 daring youngsters went hiking at Wadsworth Park in northwest Great Falls, Montana, on a chilly January 3, 1956. They encountered an odd and unnerving sight while strolling along a dirt path. The radio was playing loudly in a car that was still running and parked between 2 trees. The emergency brake was applied, and its headlights remained on. The motorist appeared to have disappeared moments earlier. Curiosity drove the youngsters to approach the car with caution. They were shocked to see a dead man partially trapped beneath the car, laying face down. They saw that what appeared to be his own belt had been used to firmly bind his hands behind his back. The guys alerted the authorities right away, and they hurried to the area to look into it. Being cautious not to disturb any possible evidence, they thoroughly searched the entire area. They discovered a gunshot wound to the back of the man's head when examining his body. His body showed no further symptoms of injuries, which was surprising. This implied that the murderer's sole goal was to take his life quickly without causing him more pain. A key piece of identification, the driver's license of 18-year-old Duane Bogle, was discovered by the police during the automobile search, and it served as a major lead in the investigation. Robbery was one of the many hypotheses that whirled through the police's heads. The fact that the car's engine was still running suggested that the murderer had made a quick escape after stealing items. Then, however, they had a horrifying suspicion. They thought there had been a crime more heinous than robbery. Since kidnappings were happening regularly at the time, there were worries that Duane might have been singled out for attention. The terrible decision to take Duane's life seemed to be the outcome of the criminal's initial plot going horribly wrong. The cops thoroughly examined the entire region because they were determined to locate any hint, but the predator had been able to entirely hide his tracks, so there was no sign of him. The heartbreaking news of Duane's murder was subsequently relayed to his family by the police. Duane's parents were overcome with astonishment and sadness at hearing the startling news. They were unable to understand how someone could hurt their cherished kid, who was always happy and adored by others. For them, it was an extremely painful moment. When Patricia's parents heard the news, they came forward and gave the police important information. They disclosed that Patricia had not come home either and was also with Duane. They said they were worried about her safety and wondered where Patricia might be if Duane had been slain. When the police first arrived at the crime scene, they found no evidence of Patricia nearby, which left them perplexed. They went back to the location and stepped up their search, since they were determined to find her. The following day, January 4, 1956, a road worker found Patricia's lifeless body 5 miles outside of Great Falls, on Vineyard Road. The tragic sight was about 8 kilometers from the discovery of Duane's body. It was clear Patricia had probably been abducted. Sadly, her body had rolled to the location from the gravel road above, as shown by a trail of blood down the rocky valley. She had also been shot in the back of the head, just like Duane. The authorities had no idea that this was only the start of a dark and terrifying story. The police made the decision to look into what happened and find out where Patricia and Duane were last seen. They learned that on the night of January 2, 1956, the pair had been spotted together having a drink at Pete's Drive-In restaurant. The restaurant employees said that they arrived at 8:30 p.m. and departed just after 9 o'clock. During their visit, they were the only ones in the automobile. The authorities assumed Patricia and Duane had driven there voluntarily, because the area where Duane and his automobile were discovered was a well-liked destination for couples. It seems that their assailant had discovered them there and ejected them from the car. Because Dwayne and Patricia's murders were so similar, authorities were certain that they had been killed by the same person. The disturbing conditions suggested a gruesome execution-style murder in which the two victims were made to kneel before being shot in the back of the head and killed. A disturbing fact surfaced as the investigation went on. Except for one misplaced shoe that had fallen off as she tumbled down the embankment, Patricia's body was completely clothed when it was found at the bottom of a steep ravine. There was no concrete proof of assault found during the initial inspection of her body, but as the inquiry progressed, an unexpected turn of events surfaced. Additional testing and analysis revealed an entirely different image. The revelation occurred when Patricia's body was found to have injuries associated with assault, defying the first conclusion. Additionally, they were able to obtain a swab from her in the hopes of identifying the murderer. Unfortunately, no definitive results could be obtained at the time due to technological restrictions. All of the test results and supporting documentation, however, were meticulously saved in case the mystery could be solved in the future. And further dimension of intrigue was introduced by the coroner's assessment. In fact, it was thought that Dwayne had survived the shooting for a few hours. It was thought that the shooting itself happened sometime between 10 p.m. and midnight, and Dwayne passed away tragically between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Authorities started a thorough investigation because they were committed to finding the murderer. The Great Falls Sheriff's Office's T.J. Leeper went above and beyond by purchasing a polygraph machine with his own funds that might provide crucial hints. To make sure it was used properly, they sent in a Seattle specialist. 10 officers dedicated their time to the case, working around the clock. They started looking for anyone who would have a reason to hurt Patricia or Dwayne. Catherine, Patricia's mother, revealed a troubling exchange she had with Dwayne on January 2, 1956, the day before his lifeless body was discovered, adding to the growing suspicion. The authorities were intrigued by this information and pondered whether the friend might be linked to the murders of Patricia and Dwayne. They managed to locate the friend and spent 4 hours questioning him. When they were unable to locate any proof connecting him to the killings, the police eventually forced to let him go. Furthermore, it was established that he was in his Texas house when the murder occurred. Unfortunately, the authorities were unable to identify a specific personal reason for Dwayne and Patricia's killings. Their investigation options were limited by this obstacle, so they turned their attention to those who had consumed alcohol the night before the killings and attempted to track down those who carried firearms. When all seems lost, 2 witnesses came forward with shocking information. They reported to the police on January 10, 1956, a man who was spotted returning home at midnight with a gun in his hand, in addition to having one. A glimmer of hope that they might have finally gotten a break in the case was generated by this information, but when they confronted the individual and spoke with him, their hope swiftly evaporated. He insisted that he didn't even own a gun and strongly denied ever leaving his residence that evening. Based on the 2 men's testimonies, the police had almost enough reason to arrest him. In a startling change of events, nevertheless, the witnesses did finally confess. It was discovered after hours of hard interrogation that they had been lying the entire time because they hated the man. They viewed this continuous probe as a chance to get what they wanted. The police were shocked and enraged by this discovery, knowing that they had to start over in their hunt for the real criminal. Sheriff Leeper had to close the full-time investigation into the case in March 1956, 2 months later, without being able to identify the murderer. The sheriff expressed his dissatisfaction and sadness for not apprehending the individual responsible for Patricia and Dwayne's deaths, but the lack of progress was discouraging. The inquiry went on, but in January 1957, the sheriff addressed the Great Falls Tribune on the 1-year anniversary of the killings. He expressed his will to continue. "I guess it's just one of those things, but we're not giving up. Maybe this year we'll catch him. He must have made a mistake. They all do. Someday, we'll find out what it was, and then we'll have them." Their families and the communities to which they belonged were profoundly affected by Dwayne and Patricia's deaths. Henry, Patricia's father, had emotional numbness and struggled to accept Patricia's passing. In an interview with the television program Hard Copy, Patricia's sister Darlene revealed that their father Henry was unable to deal with the loss or talk about Patricia. Darlene decided to treasure the good times she shared with her sister as a way to find comfort. Both families understood that nothing could bring Patricia and Dwayne back, no matter how much it hurt. It was really hard to understand the loss, and it seemed impossible to find closure. Catherine, Patricia's mother, revealed that for years following the murder, she and Dwayne's mother corresponded by mail. Because of their shared loss and sadness, the two families were able to connect through their correspondence. Meanwhile, the case had remained unsolved. Detective Bill Madison brought a new perspective to the 2001 investigation into the murders of Dwayne and Patricia. He found a swab from Patricia's autopsy that had been kept for more than 45 years in evidence storage. The swab was transferred to the Montana State Police Crime Lab for processing using the latest developments in DNA technology. Patricia had been beaten, as the lab shockingly discovered a cell in the swab that did not belong to Dwayne. Over the course of the following few years, investigators compared the cell's DNA to that of over 35 previously recognized suspects. But the DNA on the sample did not match that of any of the suspects. The swab's DNA was also compared to national criminal databases by the investigators, but no matches were discovered. They investigated suspects such as Boston mobster James Whitey Bulger, who had resided in the Great Falls region at the time of the killings. Bulger was previously arrested in 1951 for the assault of a 15-year-old girl. Edward Wayne, a convicted serial murderer who killed two couples years after Dwayne and Patricia's deaths, was another possibility. He denied any participation, although the authorities suspected he might have been in the Great Falls region at the time. When Bulger's and Wayne's DNA did not match the swabs, they were both disqualified as suspects. After 18 more years of investigation, a breakthrough was made, motivated by the method employed to solve the Golden State Killer case in 2018. Assigned to the Patricia and Dwayne murder case, Detective Sergeant John Kenneron was adamant about pursuing the investigation. In order to obtain further DNA evidence from the swab obtained at Patricia's autopsy, he collaborated with forensic scientists. They embraced a state-of-the-art technique in 2019 called genetic genealogy with GED match technology. Forensic genealogists were able to compare the DNA profile discovered at the crime site with profiles in public genealogical databases. Thanks to this novel technique, they were able to create a family tree and find distant relatives by examining the common DNA. Making the connections between various people and their genetic connections was similar to solving a jigsaw. The investigators were about to reveal the suspect after carefully creating the family tree, but there was a terrifying turn to the tale. It was difficult to get a direct DNA sample from the leading suspect because he had already died and his bones had been cremated. Unfazed, they focused on the suspect's kids, who lived close to Great Falls, and asked for their DNA to compare. To their surprise, the children's DNA revealed that the cell discovered during Patricia's autopsy had come from their father. When the children learned that their loving father was to blame for the deaths of two individuals, it was a heartbreaking discovery. Kenneth Gould, who also resided in Great Falls, was formally identified by the Cascade County Sheriff's Office as the murderer of Patricia and Dwayne on June 8, 2021. Following a comprehensive investigation and DNA analysis, the authorities were certain that Kenneth Gould was the murderer of Patricia and Dwayne. However, Gould cannot be tried or formally identified as the murderer because he had already died. Rather, they were limited to designating him as the case's most likely suspect. This historic announcement was made over 65 years after the untimely deaths of Patricia and Dwayne, making it the oldest case ever solved in history, utilizing the cutting-edge method of genetic genealogy. The local horse trainer, Kenneth Gould, was born and raised in Great Falls, Montana. He married 16-year-old Lula Bell Brown in 1952. At the age of 24, began a family and raised 5 kids. He lived very close to Patricia's home and was often spotted riding horses in the neighborhood around the time of the murder. Gould lived close to the location of the incident, but his name was never in the police files and he had no obvious relationship to either Patricia or Dwayne. Oddly, Gould sold his family's land in February 1956, a month after the killings, and started a string of movements throughout Montana before landing in Missouri in 1967. He never went back to Montana after that. At the age of 79, Gould's adventure came to an end in 2001 when he died in Oregon County, Missouri. His life continued to be entangled with the mystery surrounding the killings of Patricia and Dwayne, raising doubts about his potential involvement and the motivation for the killings. People can have secrets they never tell anyone. Cascade County Sheriff's Office Detective Sergeant John Caneron said in reference to the case, "Many of Patricia and Dwayne's loved ones had already died and were unable to hear the news because so much time had passed between the murders and Gould's identification. Darlene, Patricia's lone surviving sister, suffered from severe dementia. When Gould was eventually found, the case's conclusion caused Dwayne and Patricia's family to experience a range of emotions. Gould's identification triggered emotions and rekindled old emotional wounds among the relatives, despite their relief at having answers at last. Karen Bogle McCarthy, Dwayne's niece, told the New York Times that her generation benefited from the use of contemporary technology in the case's resolution. Jim Bogle, Dwayne's younger brother James, has a daughter named Karen. As a child, Jim Bogle had always admired Dwayne. Since Jim died of a neurological disease in November 2013, he was sadly unable to witness the identification of his beloved brother's killer. The surviving family of Patricia and Dwayne was extremely relieved that they were no longer burdened with the bizarre hypotheses and wild speculations surrounding the case. The idea that Dwayne had joined the mob in Great Falls and caused their untimely deaths was one scenario that devastated his family. Additionally, there were rumors that Dwayne was involved with narcotics dealers in Texas, but Gould's identification ended decades of conjecture and rumors in addition to exposing the truth about who separated Dwayne from his family. Even though there is now closure, the families impacted by this tragedy still have emotional scars. How do you feel about this case? What do you believe might be the driving force behind the murders of Patricia and Dwayne? And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Two close women in his life were taken from him by criminals, and he will always be grieving for them. It's said that lightning never strikes the same spot twice, but our hero has had the opposite experience due to a horrible turn of events. Jim Larson lost two ladies he loved 7 years apart to petty thieves. Twice, men who only ever show up in people's worst nightmares tear his life apart. His sister Sonia Larson, who wanted to be a teacher, started it all. Her first year at the University of Florida had just begun. She and her roommate, Christina Powell, went to Walmart one August evening in 1990 to get some necessities. The two young women were observed and followed home by Danny Rowling, a vagabond who claimed to be possessed and acting under the direction of a demon. They were dozing off in their beds when he broke into the dorm. He repeatedly stabbed them. 5 Florida college students were killed and disfigured by Gainesville felon Danny Rowling, shocking both the victims' families and the nation at large. There were more fatalities, but in our scenario, people forget the victims and only remember the serial killer's name. Her family was deeply hurt by the death of a sister and a daughter, and Sonia Larson's terrible passing never stopped plaguing them. The Larson family could never have predicted that the terrible, violent death in their family would recur, causing them to relive the trauma in their own nightmares. Carla Larson left her kid at daycare on the morning of June 10, 1997, and went to work as a project engineer at Centex Rooney. The day at the Florida construction site was swelteringly hot. Carla informed Cindy Harris, a coworker, just before lunch that she would be running a little behind schedule because she was going to the grocery shop to get some food and beverages for a meeting that afternoon. She left work at midday and went to the new supermarket on International Drive, which is close to Osceola. Carla Larson didn't come back to work for a few hours. She never showed up for an important meeting that she was scheduled to be at. Her coworkers became alarmed and started looking for Carla on their own, following her path back to the grocery she had intended to visit. They continued to hope that she might have been delayed in returning because of a little incident, her phone dying or her car breaking down. However, the search was unsuccessful. Around 4 p.m., Carla, her car, and her presence were nowhere to be seen. Cindy called Jim Larson, Carla's husband, to inform him that Carla had not been at work since noon and had not returned from the store. Jim reported his wife missing to the Orange County Sheriff's Office over the phone. When they were both in college 8 years ago, they started dating. Jim was enthralled by Carla's beauty and charm when he was studying graphic design. He was very fortunate to have found someone as considerate, kind, and caring as she was. They eventually got married because they felt the same way. They moved into a modest house on Orlando's Stone Court. After Jim's sister passed away tragically, Carla helped him regain his desire to life by pulling him back from the brink. She comforted him and gave him encouragement to keep going and find happiness once more. After Carla earned a degree in civil engineering from the University of Florida, they went to Atlanta and then back to Florida to look for work and start a family. Jim was hesitant to have a kid with her because he didn't want to introduce a new life into a society where people like Danny Rowling preyed on the defenseless. Jim finally found some peace of mind after undergoing a lot of counseling and receiving constant support from his wife. Jessica, the Larsons' long-awaited daughter, arrived soon after. They purchased a modest home in Orlando on a peaceful cul-de-sac. They put in a home security system and sturdy locks. To ensure that his family was completely safe both inside and outside their house, Jim even purchased a guard dog. Jim accepted a position at a nearby business, and Carla was sent to work on a new amusement park project in Orlando. They found happiness in the little things in life. Jim and Carla managed their parental duties without sacrificing their significant and taxing careers. However, on a typical summer day, Jim's idyllic life, which he had fought so hard to build, took a sad turn when Carla vanished. When Jim reported the disappearance of Carla Larson, Tom Woodard was on duty and got a radio call. At first, Tom, a seasoned officer, didn't take it too seriously because he thought it was just another domestic dispute. He nevertheless made the decision to investigate the matter. The sheriff sensed anything strange while speaking with Jim. Jim appeared terribly worried and unnecessarily agitated. The sheriff was certain that it was a normal missing persons case, unlike others he had met in similar circumstances. He assumed that Carla had either left Jim because of a disagreement or taken some time to collect her thoughts. But there had been no family problems, no conflicts. Everything was content and stable. Tom Woodard was unaware at the time that Jim was under a great lot of stress due to his fear of losing his wife, especially after the event in Gainesville and his ongoing struggles with the pain of losing his sister. He was afraid that a cherished woman would be lost as a result of this disappearance once more. They started looking for Carla. Given that Mrs. Larson had a 1-year-old kid and a solid marriage, family members emphasized that it was extremely unlikely that she would have left her family. Jim Larson, 37, stated under interrogation that he had been employed at Home Depot until 3 p.m. that day. Someone at his wife's place of employment called him at around 4 p.m. to inform him that she hadn't been seen since midday. However, how could a young woman, like the lead character in Sandra Bullock's film The Vanishing, disappear from a supermarket parking lot in the middle of the day? The missing woman was last seen going toward a grocery store close to the construction site, according to eyewitness accounts. She was confirmed to have arrived at the store and bought the things she intended to buy by a signed receipt. What transpired after Carla left the supermarket was still a mystery. She might have run into someone. Since the woman's white-gray Ford Explorer with the license plate TGX99V was also missing, investigators were attempting to ascertain the time and place of her disappearance. In the afternoon, witnesses also claimed to have seen a white Ford Explorer traveling carelessly on a gravel road close to a forested area. A Caucasian male with dark hair and a deep tan was the driver's description. The accused kidnapper was depicted in a composite sketch. Since the car might be a crime scene, a search team was dispatched to the area to look into it. Such incidents don't frequently occur in Orlando. The hunt for Carla attracted a large number of volunteers. The city's citizens, particularly those in College Park, were frightened when word spread that the young woman had vanished from the grocery parking lot. The volunteers posted leaflets at bus stops and grocery stores. The area around the store was searched by search teams. The search radius increased with every hour. Over the course of the 2-day search, a helicopter was brought in to survey additional ground. Even though there was less and less chance of finding Carla alive every minute, the homicide department and her co-workers persisted. After 36 hours of searching the same spot again, 2 of Carla's co-workers finally found something early on June 12. A woman's mangled body was lying in a marsh covered in a towel. One of the men described how, following the gory finding, he and his companion had exited the vehicle to explore when they smelled something odd but were unable to identify its source. From the little flash of his lighter, Jack lit a cigarette. The aroma was brought toward them by a modest breeze. After roughly 70 feet of leisurely walking, they located the woman at 3:39 p.m. She was half covered in sand, lying behind a shrub in the swampy region. It took the men a long moment to understand that what they had discovered was, indeed, Carla Larson, who had vanished 2 days before. She was naked, with a blue towel over her head and her long blonde hair flowing down her back. Her wedding band was the only piece of jewelry left. When Jim Larson and his family noticed the patrol cars, they began searching the area on their own. Jim was told about the discovery in the woods by a police chaplain. He felt nothing when the cops discovered her partially covered in sand, but nobody realized that the man was already burned up and overcome with emotional pain. In order to ascertain whether Mr. Larson was responsible for her death, the police were so perplexed by his actions that they put him through a polygraph test. Locals who had been keeping tabs on the COVID hunt, Carla even said that Larson appeared too aloof throughout the probe, but they failed to realize that he was just exhausted. Jim was shocked that he had experienced this twice. He stopped sleeping and eating. He had black circles under his eyes and had lost a lot of weight. The police brought detectives to what they thought might be the scene of a crime, roped off the area, and summoned the medical examiner. Investigators thought that there had been an attack after first examining the scene of the body, since the woman was found naked and all of her jewelry, aside from her wedding ring, was gone. So was it a robbery or an assault? In addition to stealing items, the robber also killed a woman. But first they had to be sure the body was indeed that of Carla Larson. Florida's extreme heat and humidity had taken their toll. The rain, animal activity, and insects had made it very difficult to identify the remains. The forensic team was concerned about the DNA evidence they could gather because the body had started to degrade, changing its chemical composition. There was not much time left. However, given Mrs. Larson's car had been last seen in the vicinity, authorities were almost positive that the severely decomposed body belonged to her. Jim Larson identified the towel found on the body and verified that it was the same towel that had been in his wife's car. Her handbag and regular clothes were gone. The investigators were greatly distressed by the autopsy findings. All traces and evidence that could have identified the offender had been obliterated by decomposition. The purported assault was not verified, and the investigation determined that strangulation was the cause of death. Could a car and a few pieces of jewelry really have cost a lady her life? Finding the car was the next objective, because the corpse did not lead them to the offender. It might hold the answers and hints that the public and the family were sorely looking for. It was determined that the white Ford Explorer bearing the license plate TGX 909V was missing. The press and television broadcast information about the car. The police were waiting for 2 weeks when they got an important call. 11:23 p.m. on June 26, 1997. A black truck was on fire in a Cocoa Beach vacant lot, according to a call. As the car burnt, it became evident that the black was not the car's natural color and was neither soot nor ash. Following the fire, white paint was visible in several parts of the body. Excessive spray on the tires showed that a cheap can of spray paint had been used to apply the black paint in an amateurish manner. After being taken to the police garage, the car was examined by forensic specialists. It was discovered during the inquiry that the torched truck, which was 62 miles from Orlando, was in fact white and belonged to Jim's victim. The car had been fitted with a radar detector, experts discovered. Detectives were able to locate the mount where the detector had been in spite of the fire damage, proving that the vehicle belonged to the Larsons. Finding the radar detector was the police's main priority. Before an unforeseen love triangle helped solve the case and identify her criminal in Central Florida, the inquiry stagnated. There are hundreds of cars that are similar to hers, but one woman's phone call caught the detective's attention in particular because of the strange tale she told. Angel Huggins and her family had arrived in Orlando on the day Carla Larson vanished. Despite having traveled to Orlando together, Angel clarified that she left the city without her spouse. Angel informed Orange County investigators John Linner and Cameron Wire that infidelity, violence, and drug usage had made their family vacation a complete bust. At a motel close to Disneyland on June 9, their family vacation came to an end the same evening it started. According to Angel Huggins, she was almost strangled to death by her husband, John Huggins, since she had refused to have an intimate relationship with him. He left the motel on West Highway 192 early the following morning and didn't come back until midday. John Huggins drove a white truck that was identical to the victim's car when he arrived at Angel's mother's home in Melbourne. In the midst of their divorce proceedings, Angel was enraged with John for his adultery. John had become engaged with Angel's sister when they were in Melbourne. Tammy also informed the cops that Huggins had been given permission to park the white SUV at John's friend Kevin Smith's residence for a few days. The investigators went to Kevin's house to ask him some questions because they were so intrigued by this narrative. However, his girlfriend answered the door as Kevin wasn't home. For a few days, Kim virtually proved that a white Ford Explorer had been parked in their driveway. It had been parked in her space, and she was unhappy since she had once lost control of her little vehicle while driving and collided with the Ford Explorer, denting it. The Explorer's white paint was still visible on her pickup. To determine whether the small paint sample belonged to Carla's automobile, collision specialists sent it to the lab. Since the paint from Mrs. Larson's automobile had been discovered on Kim's, this was required to demonstrate Kevin Smith's role in Carla's car's disappearance. The police had questions for Kevin Smith before they could prove his whole involvement, but they were almost certain that Carla's Ford Explorer had been parked at his residence. The person who had been operating the SUV had to be identified. Despite matching the sketch of the man who was observed driving Carla's car that day, Kevin Smith would not identify the driver. He added that he had been asked to temporarily park the automobile by his friend John Huggins. Upon inspecting the truck, Kevin discovered a radar detector inside. He tore it from the automobile and held onto it for a while, but he concealed it in the yard out of concern that he could be caught. Smith said that his friend John Huggins had driven the automobile to the parking space and that he had nothing to do with it. Kevin didn't want to betray his friend, but he was afraid the automobile might have been stolen. He was keen to demonstrate that he was telling the truth and had nothing to do with the woman's disappearance. Kevin voluntarily turned over the radar detector after he had a conversation with the cops. After more questioning by the authorities, Kevin finally confessed to locating the radar detector, erasing all fingerprints, and tossing it into the bushes close to his home. By tracking down the serial number, the authorities were able to collect the detector and verify that it belonged to the victim. The first concrete evidence that Carla's automobile had been parked at Kevin's and that John Huggins had driven it there came when detectives verified that it had been fitted in her vehicle. Investigators now had the radar detector, a paint match, and the car, but the crucial question was still unsolved. John Huggins was the top suspect right away. John Huggins has a lengthy criminal background, according to a thorough investigation of his past. He was a noted bank thief with a history of armed robberies. As it turned out, John was known to carry guns and had outstanding arrest warrants for robberies in Florida. Because John Huggins had a lengthy criminal history, victims of his past offenses recognized him when his face aired on television. Although he had conducted armed attacks, robbed banks, and looted convenience stores, the police wanted to be sure they had enough evidence against him before making an arrest, particularly because Carla's jewelry was still missing. To summarize, the victim had been found in possession of a pendant, a chain, a garnet ring, and diamond earrings. But the hunt for the jewelry was about to linger on until detectives got another lucky break in a phone call. According to Angel Huggins, she had uncovered a startling finding that might terminate the inquiry and result in Carla's criminal being imprisoned. She clarified that she had located one of Carla's missing pieces of jewelry after she and her mother had investigated the house. The police searched Angel's mother's home and the shed on the property twice after Angel called, but they were unable to locate any evidence that would implicate Angel. But the woman saw a screwdriver on top of a box in the shed when she was searching for insect repellent. She impulsively opened a shed electrical box and discovered the victim's jewels concealed within. The jewelry, the electrical box, and its cover did not have any fingerprints on them. Looking at the last piece of the puzzle, we see John driving a stolen vehicle. The attempt to strangle his wife at the hotel was picked up by the radar detector. The dates of their stay coincided with the day Carla vanished, on May 28, 1998, and the hotel room they occupied was right across from the supermarket. John Huggins was accused of robbery, kidnapping, and auto theft in addition to the murder of Carla Larson. After being indicted by an Orange County grand jury, John Huggins was taken into custody in Maryland. Huggins requested that his case be transferred, and the trial court granted his request, moving it to Duval County. However, Those who haven't lost two loved ones don't see the world through Jim Larson's eyes. On January 25, 1999, Larson sat in his tidy living room in a peaceful, tree-lined Orlando suburb, the kind of home that most middle-class Americans consider safe, feeling a deep void and an unrelenting, numbing pain. Because he still has a daughter to raise, he still yearns for them and perceives danger in everything. Mr. Larson now finds motivation to continue through his daughter Jessica. Since lightning has already hit him twice and won't do so again, he fervently hopes and believes that the young girl didn't fully comprehend the atrocities that took her mother and aunt. He also prays that she won't ever feel terror or dread again. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The date was March 24, 1961. It was cold in Keystone Islands, North Miami. Frances DeMari, 32, called the Miami-Dade police just after 3 in the morning. She said that two unidentified attackers had murdered her husband, 52-year-old Joseph DeMari. Who were the attackers who murdered Joseph? Was this a random act of violence, or was it part of a planned hit? Today, we're examining Joseph DeMari's complex cold case, which was finally solved in 2023 and dates back 62 years. So, let's go straight to the riddle without any more ado. Northeast Miami-Dade County, Florida, is home to the city and suburb of North Miami. There are a little over 60,000 people living there. North Miami saw a significant increase in organized crime in the 1950s and 1960s, including several mafia families. During this time, the DeMaris were also thriving in North Miami, and the mafia, also known as La Cosa Nostra, had a big impact on the city's underground. Joseph J. DeMare was born in 1910 and raised in Boston with his younger brothers, Joseph and Dominic. He had a strong relationship with his brothers that lasted into adulthood. The three brothers opened a fresh vegetable sales company in 1928. After beginning with a pushcart, they eventually set up shop in Boston. As a result of their increasing sales, they relocated to Quincy Market in 1930. By 1939, their company had grown all over the country. To satisfy the demands of grocery chains, the DeMare brothers partnered with tomato producers in other states, including Florida, Texas, and California. In order to guarantee a year-round supply for their clients, they were also the first in New England to import tomatoes straight from Cuba. The brothers made the decision to engage in farming as their firm prospered. In Florida and then California, they began growing tomatoes in open packing operations. They spread to other places, such as South Carolina. Joseph married Josephine, who was only 2 years his junior, in 1937. Joseph, Josephine, and their three children, Richard, James, and Joseph Jr., migrated from Boston to North Miami in the early 1940s. Joseph and his brothers had established a living selling fresh produce there. Before relocating to Keystone Island in North Miami in 1953, Joseph DeMare resided in Miami Beach. Linda, Joseph's only child, was born. Sadly, his cherished wife Josephine died shortly after, in 1956, from breast cancer. Joseph DeMare married Frances, a woman who was 20 years his junior, 3 years later in 1959. To combat frost, winter farmers in the late 1950s would light kerosene lights and place them in between tomato plant rows. To make sure their crops didn't freeze, Richard recalled his father awakening them and then guiding them to the fields. Before the tomato plants were delivered to be processed, Joseph and his three boys would drive into farms and tend to them. The 21-year-old Richard went to Ohio in March 1961 to revise his 52-year-old father's will and meet with his siblings and business associates to discuss the prospect of a divorce between Joseph and Frances. At the time, Frances, his stepmother, did not reside with them. Joseph DeMare frequently traveled throughout the United States and Latin America while managing several facets of the company from Miami. His kids lived on the family's Bradenton farm, while he and his new wife Frances and Joseph's daughter resided at the Keystone Point House in 1961. However, none of them could have ever anticipated what was going to happen. On March 24, 1961, a chilly winter night in Bradenton, Richard and his two brothers were sound asleep on their father's farm around 3 in the morning. At the same moment, however, Frances DeMare called the police in a panic and told them a terrifying story. She reported that she had left her home in Keystone Point to go out to dinner with Joseph. As they headed out for dinner, Joseph sat beside Frances, who had taken the wheel of their Cadillac Fleetwood. They came to a stop at a junction slightly west of the Broad Causeway, close to Keystone Point's south exit. Anarchy ensued as two men abruptly leapt into their vehicle. Frances was forced to drive to an empty lot in Sans Souci Estates when one of the men firmly placed a gun against the back of her head. When Joseph turned to look, the pistol slammed into his face. Frances yelled and was struck as well. Frances was struck by the rifle and rendered unconscious. Joseph was dead in the seat next to her when she woke up, and the murderers had left. In a hurry, she dashed to a Phillips 66 service station nearby, racing through the shrubs and brambles. She called the police from that location. The first officer on the scene was Patrolman Van Scola of the North Miami Police Department. At the petrol station, he watched Frances, and she didn't look too hurt. She had scratches on her face and her dress had some bloodstains on it. She appeared to have scratched her face with her hands, as if she did it herself. Frances told him she couldn't see the shooting because she was knocked out or rendered unconscious. Shell casings were found in the Cadillac's rear seat during the investigation. Upon closer inspection of the photos, it was discovered that the rear seat also had at least 2 unused rounds. Police records show that Norman Logan, a gas station employee, claimed that Frances never spoke of her husband being shot until the police arrived. According to 2 local fishermen, they heard nothing during the incident. Frances told the police that the attackers stole $400.00 in cash from her husband and $5.00 worth of jewelry from her. A day after the murder and heist, however, a gold ring and diamond cufflinks were still discovered on her husband's body. Frances claimed that the gunman had taken her valuables with force, according to the Miami Herald. She disregarded the bandits' orders not to look back, and one of them hit her with his revolver, knocking her out. She did, however, tell the police that her spouse had turned around earlier. According to the article, when Frances regained consciousness a few minutes later, she found her husband slumped against the car door, blood streaming from his head, and the attackers had run away. Panicked, she hurried to a neighboring Phillips 66 fuel station, where she contacted the police for help, navigating the brambles, thorns, and jagged pebbles. In a follow-up interview with the Miami Herald following the killing, Frances said that the attacker called her husband Frank rather than Joe. She guessed that they might have thought Joe was someone else for some reason. Additionally, when the police spoke with her about the murder, she did not provide them with this information. According to other news accounts from the time, Frances described how the shooter tried to grab her jewels, and when she became emotional, he hit her brutally with the revolver. She lost consciousness as a result, and when she regained consciousness, she found her husband shot. Once more, the cops did not bring up the hysterical aspect of this during their interrogation with Frances. Frances arrived to the petrol station and told the owner's son, Norman Logan, that the 2 men had gotten into the car, one in the front and one in the back, according to another Herald piece. On the night of the murder, however, Norman had made it plain to the police that Frances had not brought up the murder until they got to the gas station. Frances's explanation of the shootout at the murder scene contained numerous inconsistencies. Was this because, during all of this, she was under pressure from someone? There was no mention of Joseph's brothers. Were they concealing something? The DeMare firm would only be split between the 2 surviving brothers after Joseph's death, which was a motivation the police extensively examined at the time. However, Frances wasn't finished yet. That same week, she gave the Herald another exclusive interview in which she repeated the events. This time, she clarified 2 males abruptly got into the back seat of the vehicle as they got closer to the Causeway Bay Shore intersection. There was no other traffic on the causeway, but a car was following. With Frances behind the wheel, one of the men pressed a pistol to the back of her head and instructed her to do as they said. They told her to keep going directly in the direction of Sans Souci Estates. They told her to turn right off of Bayshore Drive after she had driven about a block. Joe, her husband, became curious and asked the men what they wanted. In response, one of the attackers declared that they wanted to take his money. Francis and Joe were instructed to keep their heads forward, but Joe kept turning back in an effort to defy them. At one point he turned and was struck hard in the face. She noticed that he was bleeding when he turned to face Francis. He turned around shortly afterward, and they hit him again. Francis started to shout in return. She was then struck twice on the head by the assailants. She was resting on the gravel outside the automobile when she came to conscious again. Her attackers had stolen all of her valuables, which was worth about $5,000.00. At the time, Joe had about $400.00 in cash, which she later found had also been stolen. The men, Francis was convinced, were no amateurs. Despite not having a clear view of them, their calm and meticulous manner persuaded her of their experience. Their speech patterns did not fit the stereotype of a hoodlum. The fact that the men called her husband Frank rather than Joe left Francis with the unshakable impression that a grave error had been committed. She claimed that she thought they had misidentified Joe for someone else, or that maybe robbery was their main motivation for some reason. She thought they had no intention of hurting anyone. Francis rationally addressed every item in this conversation that did not align with the assertions she made to the police and to press. However, why was she defending her claims? It was clear that she would not recall every detail of what happened if she had suffered a concussion from the hits to her head. More intriguingly, though, she was also justifying the attackers by claiming that they might have thought Joseph was someone else and that their main goal was robbery rather than murder. This prompted the authorities to speculate that the murderer might have been a close friend or relative of Joseph and Francis. The authorities were unable to collect any DNA samples or even fingerprints that would have allowed them to identify the murderers because technology was not very advanced back then. Since no one saw the murderers and they left before Francis regained consciousness, there were no more hints, and the case slowly faded into obscurity. However, Joseph's son Richard recalled that before to Joseph's murder, there was some friction between him and Francis. Richard actually met with the other members of the family to talk about the divorce from Francis and his father's bequest. Additionally, Francis had moved to Ohio and was not living with Joseph at the time of the murder. After learning that Joseph had altered his will, she had returned. His will now states that if Francis remained with Joseph during their marriage, she would only be entitled to a portion of the wealth. Richard said that Francis did not even cry on the day of Joseph's funeral. As straight-laced as they come, she was. Although she claimed to have been hit by the pistol's butt on her forehead, there were no visible wounds there, and she was more concerned with getting her hair done for the funeral than the actual event. Following the funeral, Francis got $250,000.00 from Joseph's bequest and gave all of Joseph's children a 24-hour notice to vacate. Additionally, Francis was married again a few weeks after Joseph's funeral. Unexpectedly, this was the lawyer who would represent Francis in her divorce case. In the 1980s, some 20 years later, Richard resumed his investigation into the case with the assistance of volunteer and lawyer Paul Novak. Novak had first-hand knowledge of crimes that occurred in and around Miami. Following careful deliberation, Novak suggested that Richard forward the case to a forensic scientist. Given that Joseph was a prosperous businessman and that organized crime had been rampant in Miami throughout the 1960s, and that numerous crimes were connected to one another, Novak and Richard believed this might be a mafia hit. Nearly 30 years after Joseph's passing, in 1991, Richard DeMare saw the case from a different angle. For a second opinion, he contacted John Thornton, a professor of forensic science at the University of California, Berkeley. Following his investigation of the case, Thornton expressed his skepticism over Francis's assertions in a letter to the Miami-Dade police. The bullet wounds appeared to have been fired from two distinct angles, and he doubted that they were consistent with the circumstances she stated. Thornton further noted that Francis's claims about the duration of the incident did not match the quantity of blood found at the crime scene, but since there was no proof, the police were unable to take it into consideration. Francis could have been suspected during the initial investigation, according to another police officer at the time. However, a high-ranking official had instructed the police not to investigate Francis because she was a victim and a widowed woman in grief. As a result, the police did not follow up on the Francis angle or question her again. Then, in the 2000s, 40 years later, Richard was presented with a list of suspects by several officers. Joseph's murder was one of the older crimes the police department was investigating. Richard's own investigations had already produced a list of these suspects, but Frances was not one of them. Frances de Marais passed away in 2006. She was 82. Including her marriage to Joseph de Marais, she had 4 previous marriages. Around 2019, Paul Novak and the homicide team at the Miami-Dade Police Department's Cold Case Squad began going over the Joseph de Marais cold case file once more, nearly 60 years after the murder and 20 years after Frances's passing. They discovered numerous hints about the probe in the old police reports. First, Richard had provided the police with some shell casings following the murder of his father. These round casings were from an Italian auto pistol, a .25 caliber SATA, which Joseph possessed but was constantly with Frances. Richard had recovered the ammunition casings after firing a few bullets into the swimming pool at their property. Richard gave the police these casings, but why? Because the shot casings discovered in Joseph's car's back seat at the time of his murder resembled these casings. The police inquiry revealed that 2 empty bullets were still laying there when the deceased was discovered. Joseph was wounded by 4 gunshots. 2 bullets went straight into his mouth from the front. The 2 additional shots struck the region in front of and behind his left ear from the left side. Because these shots were fired so close together, there were gunpowder remnants near the wounds. This indicated that the person who killed Joseph was really close to him in terms of closeness. Since the wounds were on his mouth and around his left ear, it was also evident that the person who shot him did so from Joseph's left side before also shooting through his mouth to confirm that he had died. This indicated that the attackers were not seated in the back seat. Joseph had 9 cuts or bruises on his skull in addition to the gunshot wounds. Additionally, Joseph exhibited injuries on his right index finger and left arm, indicating that he was either dragged after being shot or that he struggled before to being shot. Blood was discovered on the outside of the vehicle, on the front and rear seats, and inside the vehicle. The blood leaked out from the bottom of the door and ran down the glass. It was confirmed during a follow-up examination in late 2019 that there was no blood found on the driver's door, steering wheel, or seat. Additionally, no blood splatter was discovered outside the front seat's center. This implied that Frances, the person occupying the driver's seat, was completely unharmed. Blood trails were seen traveling backward on the outside of the automobile. The volume of blood revealed how severe the injuries were and how long it took for the bleeding to start following the shooting. This indicated that Joseph was shot while the car was moving, and it continued to move while he was bleeding. This, too, went against Frances's statement. The automobile could not have continued to move after she passed out, as she had claimed to have done while behind the wheel. Joseph's jaw was somewhat red, but there was no blood found in his lungs. According to medical professionals, these results might indicate that Joseph's airway was blocked when he was shot, because someone had their arm around his neck. On the other hand, it can indicate that the lethal bullet instantly stopped breathing. Frances said it was a heist, but when Joseph was found in the car, his diamond cufflinks and gold ring were still on him. There were no gunshots, indications of a struggle, or even a bullet being fired, according to 2 men fishing nearby. Frances's feet were uncut, and her shoes were discovered next to the car in a way that indicated they had been placed there on purpose rather than strewn about. A female officer suffered many cuts and bruises to her feet as she walked the same route Frances claimed to have gone, barefoot, from the automobile to the gas station. Norman Logan, the first person Frances spoke to at the petrol station, said she never brought up her husband's shooting. However, when the police and Novak conducted ballistic tests, the greatest hits were still to come. They discovered that only if the bullet was shot from the driver's end could the trajectory of the bullets at the crime scene be satisfied. It did not follow the path of the bullets Frances had described in her initial remarks. Furthermore, it was established that the round casings Richard provided to the police matched the shells of the bullets that killed Joseph, indicating that a .25 caliber SAT also killed Joseph. The day Joseph walked out for the final time with Frances, the identical gun had vanished from the de Marais home. The most shocking aspect of the case files, however, was the discovery of a blood trail from Joseph's garage that led to the location of his Cadillac. This made it quite evident that Joseph had actually been shot in his garage while he and Frances were at home before they even left for supper. The homicide squad investigators and Novak were aware that Frances could only inherit Joseph's debt if she remained with him during their marriage, and that is exactly what transpired. Frances received the $250,000 0 cents because she remained with Joseph till his death. The authorities came to the conclusion that Frances killed Joseph in order to obtain the money from him because of the divorce angle and Joseph's alteration of the will. The police concluded that Frances DeMare was the only individual who would carry out all of this, based on this and all the other clear indicators. The Miami-Dade Homicide and Cold Case Squad conducted a press conference on May 10, 2023, nearly 3 years after the Joseph DeMare cold case was reopened. They declared that they had sufficient grounds to suspect Frances DeMare of Joseph DeMare's murder. The upcoming divorce and Joseph's alteration of the will served as the motivation for her murder. In order to do this, she shot Joseph in the garage of their home, drove the car 3 or 4 miles away, went barefoot to the gas station, and called the police while leaving Joseph's body in the car. The murder weapon was never located because the police thought Frances had thrown the .25 caliber STA pistol beneath an underbridge. Richard, aged 82, expressed relief after this announcement, although he was not pleased at all. He was aware that the murderer was his stepmother. Richard further disclosed that he had instructed the police to look into Frances and her murder in 1961, but they had refused. Since Frances died in 2006, she was unable to face consequences for her crime. She had never been held responsible for her acts in her entire life. According to Novak, this case exemplifies how politics can trump justice. It is still unclear whose senior official gave the order for the police to leave Frances alone. Since then, the DeMare business has expanded greatly, going global. They state on their websites that the DeMare firms still adhere to the principles of excellence, honesty, and hard work that the brothers created. They think that the next generation of the DeMare family and their hard-working staff will carry on their tenacity and resolve. Even though his stepmother would never receive justice, Richard, who was also affected by same ideals, might find some comfort in the knowledge that she pursued justice for his father. Why, in your opinion, wasn't Frances given more attention during the preliminary inquiries? Do you believe that a more extensive plot was concealed? And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Without love, trust, and basic respect, what sustains a marriage? For the sake of the children, some attempt to keep the family together. Some are deterred by religious convictions or a combination of these, while others are concerned about other people's opinions and dread public criticism. However, the will to do whatever it takes to keep a marriage intact can occasionally degenerate into a terrible tragedy. Although Jacqueline and Paul Crimble's story is not unusual, its cruelty, selfishness, and cynicism garnered a lot of attention. The perpetrator was labeled the Black Widow and imprisoned, but in an open interview, her daughter admitted that her mother persisted in destroying lives while incarcerated. The connection between Paul Crimble and Jacqueline. Born on December 18, 1974 in County Armagh, Northern Ireland, Jacqueline, also known as Jackie Mary Bennett, was the younger of 2 children in a typical middle-class household. She was unpredictable, spoilt, rebellious, and occasionally even violent from an early age. Jackie's behavior worsened over her adolescence and eventually became uncontrollable, but her family blamed it on adolescence in the hopes that she would outgrow it. As they say, opposites attract, and this idea seemed to work wonderfully when she met Paul Crimble in high school. He was 3 years older than her and very different from her. Here, Paul was a quiet, reserved young man from a devout household who excelled academically and was seen as having great talent and promise. He was drawn to Jacqueline's confidence, vigor, and audacity. She was the first female he had a serious crush on, and perhaps the only one. Paul was welcomed by Jackie's parents, who supported her decision since they thought he would help their daughter become more composed, logical, and sensible. Her family accepted Paul like a member of the family from the moment they met, and at times it seemed that they treated him better than Jackie herself. Paul's parents, however, were wary of his decision, but did not dissuade the young pair from dating. The couple appeared to be incompatible, according to school friends as well. Paul attempted to settle everything amicably, avoiding violence, and was seen as amiable, forthright, and extremely responsible. But Jackie frequently incited arguments and preferred to settle them with physical force. A courteous, sensible, and mature young guy above his years, he was always dependable and always willing to provide a helping hand to others. When Jacqueline became pregnant at the age of 17, she informed her boyfriend that she was in her last year of school and that Paul, then 20 years old, was already enrolled in college. Paul said he was ready to marry her and assume full responsibility for her and the child as soon as he found out. Although Jacqueline wasn't prepared for parenthood or child-rearing, ending the pregnancy was unavoidable. Such a serious offense would not be tolerated by Paul or his pious family. Jackie accepted Paul's formal proposal when he purchased a ring. In 1992, the couple celebrated with their closest friends and family at a small wedding. Remarkably, just a few days prior to the occurrence, Hall told his best friend that he and Jacqueline were too dissimilar, questioned whether her sentiments were genuine, and was even scared of her because of her erratic behavior. Additionally, the groom questioned whether he genuinely loved her or if he was merely feeling obligated and sympathetic. However, he had nothing to compare because he had never dated other girls. After paying close attention, his friend attempted to talk Paul out of getting married by telling him that it would be the worst decision he ever made and that he would be miserable for the rest of his life. Paul was adamant, though, stating that he couldn't abandon a girl who was expecting his child. In addition, he thought that becoming a mother would improve Jacqueline's personality by making her softer and more composed. Paul had generally hoped for the best, but he was unaware of how mistaken he was. Life in the family without affection. The young couple's first child, a daughter named Danielle, was born at the beginning of 1993. Jacqueline gave birth to their son 6 years later. After the birth of their second kid, Adam Paul made sure his family had all they needed because he was their only provider. In 2000, the offenders moved into a comfortable 3-bedroom townhouse in Armagh after deciding they needed a larger residence. Paul was making a good living as a senior mechanical engineer by that time. However, his wife claimed to prefer work and did not bother herself with it, running the home and bringing up the kids, but she was also not very good at either. Jackie was a short-tempered, greedy, and lazy person who frequently acted aggressively, even with her kids. Jacqueline attempted to find employment when the kids were a little older, but she was never able to hold down a position for very long due to her combative and argumentative personality. In addition, she went out to bars almost every evening to consume alcohol while her husband stayed at home with their son and daughter. Mrs. Crimble was not a particularly amiable lady, even when she was sober, and she became a true rage when she was drunk. In addition to starting arguments, she also got into fights, cursed, and acted inappropriately around different males. Nobody could foresee what she would do next, and she reacted aggressively to any comments or suggestions to act more humbly. Family, friends, and neighbors knew what was going on and truly felt sorry for Paul and the kids, who were the ones who were most negatively impacted by Jacqueline's actions. Many people were aware of the young woman's misadventures and made an effort to stay away from her because the family resided in a tiny, peaceful town. Her husband and kids were impacted by her negative reputation, and they had to deal with the fallout from their classmates. Jackie didn't try to disguise her crazy lifestyle. Her frequent visits to entertainment venues, however, made the staff and other patrons nervous because they knew that her presence would undoubtedly result in a brawl or altercation. Because she may strike out at any time, Jacqueline held her family in constant fear, although Paul made an effort to keep his mouth shut. His friends, family, and co-workers saw that he was uncomfortable with his wife or even just talking about her. Paul was frequently told to leave this woman, but he was afraid of losing the opportunity to see his kids. Jackie would instantly threaten to cut him off from their son and daughter in the event of any disagreement. She also threatened to use her friends against him. These were males she frequently saw at bars who were willing to break the law to protect her. In these circumstances, Paul typically gave in to his wife and said nothing. The unexplained assault on Sunday morning, June 20, 2004. A terrified woman begged for assistance by calling the emergency services. She said that she and her husband were ambushed in their home by 3 strangers who beat them, tied them up, tried to rob them, and then took their car and her husband with them. When Jacqueline Crimble called, police and emergency personnel hurried to the address she gave. They discovered a woman at the house with a plastic wire tie securing her hands behind her back. But since her legs were unbound, the authorities assumed she had partially freed herself. Notably, despite the victim's initial claims that the attackers had beaten and bound them, she had no wounds or bruises on her body. Luckily, the couple's kids weren't home because they were sent to be with their paternal grandparents for the weekend. Jacqueline claims that she and her spouse had gone to a pub on Saturday night to unwind. After midnight, they went home after drinking. But just as Paul was opening the front door, 3 people sprung into the shadows and shoved them inside. Armed with a revolver, the invaders battered and restrained the couple while requesting money and illegal drugs. Paul reportedly made an effort to placate the crooks by pleading with them to let him and his wife go and vowing not to notify the police. However, this only infuriated them. In front of the frightened Jacqueline, they struck him multiple times before starting to strangle him with a plastic bag. The attackers chose to at least take the car when it became evident that there was no money or illegal drugs in the house. But for some reason they took the owner with them, leaving the chained woman behind. Jacqueline was able to use her tongue to get to the phone and call the police when the thieves drove off with Paul. She pleaded with the investigators to locate and rescue her husband right away because she was certain he might still be alive. The authorities had no reason to suspect the woman, although she looked and behaved suspiciously calm despite her anxiety. The disfigured body in the trunk at that very moment. Investigators started gathering evidence at the crime scene as soon as the couple's car was reported stolen throughout the county. Although they made an effort to learn as much as they could about the assault, Jacqueline asserted that the culprits were disguised. She was unable to remember any identifying characteristics, such as limping, speech impairments, or specifics of the clothing. All she could say was that they were men, and there were 3 of them. Less than a day later, on Monday morning, the Crimble family automobile was discovered abandoned only 3 miles from the residence where the attack had occurred after the search got underway. It was parked next to a long, empty home in a secluded alley. The owner's mangled body, which was obviously beaten and tortured, lay inside the trunk. The 35-year-old man had several bruises all over his body and face, his hands tied behind his back and his legs shackled with a wire tie. Jackie responded very composedly when she was told about the gory discovery. She didn't appear to mind her husband's cruel deprivation, who was also the father of her children. She made an effort to look shocked and hurt, but she was unable to shed a tear, so she asked when she would be able to have her car back in less than a minute. All of this seemed quite suspicious, so the police investigated the young widow, the primary suspect. At first, Jacqueline's version was accepted as the sole reliable one and was not questioned. Law enforcement, however, suspected the widowed mother of 2 might be lying because of her peculiar conduct. She was never a model wife or mother, and it soon became clear that she and Paul had been having a long-term, failing marriage. She was disparaged by her parents and kids as well as by neighbors and acquaintances. Additionally, it was discovered that Jackie had been dating Roger Ferguson for a number of months. He resided with his mother on the farm he owned in Armagh. She and Crimble were frequently spotted drinking alcohol together in the town's entertainment establishments. Additionally, Roger paid the married woman a visit at home while her husband was at work and the kids were at daycare and school. Roger was thought to be a potential accomplice, and Jacqueline switched from victim to the primary suspect just 1 day after the automobile with the mutilated body was discovered. The woman seemed far more focused on getting her automobile back than she did on being a heartbroken widow. In addition, her story of being attacked by a group of armed addicts sounded unbelievable. Where had they gone after leaving the car with a body in the trunk? And this was the first time something like this had ever happened in the sleepy town. It was also odd that the enigmatic crooks were able to leave no evidence behind. No other eyewitness reported seeing dubious visitors around the community. But nearly everyone who ever had contact with the victim had bad things to say about her. Furthermore, it was quickly discovered that the dead had an insurance policy, and in the event of his death, his wife could anticipate receiving a hefty settlement of £300,000 sterling. In this instance, a legitimate motivation that could account for the crime had emerged. Jacqueline said she was able to use her tongue to dial a button phone and make a help call during the crime investigation. In fact, there were traces of her saliva on the gadget when it was taken for inspection. Investigators did see, however, that the phone was on the coffee table, face down, with her hands bound behind her back during the first examination of the crime scene. If it had been in that position from the beginning, she could not have switched it over after the call or called for assistance. The couple's home computer search history showed odd searches. When Jacqueline was queried explicitly about the months-long search for information on life insurance payout amounts and procedures in the case of the policyholder's death, she claimed to know nothing and implied that maybe Paul would be interested. Roger Ferguson had a strong alibi and was thought to be a possible collaborator in the crime. According to his mother, he stayed at home the night since he wasn't feeling well, and at 1:30 in the morning, she was looking through the home medicine cabinet for a remedy for his stomach problems. The old woman's evidence was compelling, but her son was not yet taken off the suspect list. When police used the signals from the suspect's cell phones to monitor their whereabouts on the night of the crime, they found that Roger had not been home as his mother had reported. As an alternative, he spent many hours at the Crimbles' home. He also kept up his friendship with the widow, and the day after Paul's funeral, he was spotted with her at a bar. The fact that Roger and Jacqueline went to a car dealership together to check at SUVs and ask about payment arrangements for such a costly purchase was another oddity. Even more strange was the presence of Roger's mother. Roger's mother was probably aware that the authorities assumed the lovers had already decided how they would spend the insurance payout following Paul's death. Jackie said during questioning that she never cheated on her husband and that she didn't intend to hurt him, but soon after no one believed her. Jacqueline had begun working as a caregiver in a nursing home prior to the disaster, but she was fired after just a few weeks because of her persistent lying and arguments. She continued to act as though she was going to work or having night shifts while staying at Ferguson's residence, though, and kept this a secret from her husband. Paul encountered one of his wife's former co-workers who unintentionally told him everything about the lie. His attempt to speak with his wife just led to further arguments. She threatened to kidnap the kids, ban their biological father from seeing them, and leave him for her boyfriend. Paul decided to compromise and ignored her adultery because this was his greatest concern. His closest friend, who subsequently testified in court as a witness, was the only person he could confide in regarding the formulation and implementation of a cunning scheme. Roger wasn't very intelligent. Despite his strength, he was easily led and had a simple intellect. Jacqueline rapidly gained total control over him by coercing her lover into doing what she wanted. She was greatly charmed by the fact that he would gladly engage in combat for her. He probably believed whatever she said since he was truly in love with her. Ferguson heard the woman's complaints about her husband, who, she claimed, was physically violent, unpleasant, and harsh. All of this was undoubtedly false, but the lover detested Paul more and more with each grievance, thinking that he was the primary source of Jacqueline's suffering and oppression, and the primary barrier to their happiness together. She instilled in his mind the notion that by getting rid of her spouse, all of their issues would be resolved and they could live together while earning a sizable income for a pleasant lifestyle. Mrs. Crimble searched for somebody who would commit the crime for cash for about 2 weeks before to the catastrophe, but she and Roger gave up after weighing their alternatives. In order to keep the full insurance payout, it appeared the lovers decided they could do it themselves without leaving any witnesses or evidence. Jacqueline took the kids to spend the weekend with their grandparents on Friday, June 18. She proposed to take her husband out for drinks on Saturday so they could unwind and chat. Paul was happy to accept the offer because he believed it could improve their relationship. It was an invitation to his death, but he was unaware of it. People in the bar that night saw Jackie making a concerted effort to make her husband, who doesn't drink, drunk. After midnight, she led her dazed husband out of the pub after purchasing drinks and almost forcing him to knock back one shot after another. The last time Paul was seen alive, they were captured on security footage. This exposed a notable disparity in timing. According to Jacqueline, the attack happened as soon as the couple returned from their 10-minute stroll to the pub and lasted no more than 15 minutes. She then reportedly phoned the police right away after her husband was abducted and taken away in their vehicle. But it took over an hour and a half from the moment they were caught on camera until the police were called. Investigators thought the offenders used this time to hide their tracks and set up a third-party attack scene. Furthermore, it seems that Jacqueline purposefully made her husband intoxicated, so he would be powerless to refuse. She said that after kicking Paul while he was on the ground, The crook started to strangle him by covering his head with a plastic bag and taping it in place. The type of injuries on the deceased's body supported her story, but by that point, the authorities had irrefutable proof that the attackers were her and her lover, Ferguson. Following a protracted and exhaustive investigation of the crime scene, investigators discovered a partially obliterated imprint of a man's shoe, the tread pattern of which matched Roger's shoes, that had clearly been attempted but unsuccessfully cleaned. However, this evidence can be regarded as circumstantial. Other, more important evidence against the criminal couple was discovered in the kitchen trash, though. A partial fingerprint of Roger's was found on the cable tie that bound Jacqueline's hands, and a cigarette butt with Roger's saliva was discovered. Ferguson's fingerprints were also discovered on the ropes that bound the deceased's hands and feet, and traces of both lovers' perspiration and oil were discovered on the bag that was used to suffocate the victim. A minor acquaintance of Roger's named Colin Robinson was also discovered to have participated in this heinous act by the investigation. On the night of the attack, Roger called him and asked for his assistance with an unidentified task. In order to avoid drawing attention to himself, the teenager drove his car, abandoned it at the end of the street per Roger's request, and walked to the house. Colin wanted to flee when he saw what was occurring, but Roger coerced him into helping transfer the body to the car and load it into the trunk by threatening him with a knife. They then took the vehicle to an empty location and left it there. The terrified young man first denied any involvement in the incident, but during the second interrogation he broke down and started confessing. Trial and punishment. The course of the investigation was several months. They collected indisputable proof throughout this period, spoke with every witness, and got the third criminal to confess, but the offender's trial didn't start until the spring of 2007, nearly 3 years after Paul Cramble was deprived of his life on May 7. The widow received a 20-year sentence after Jacqueline and Roger were found guilty of a premeditated crime with the goal to earn insurance money, in prison, while her accomplice and lover were sentenced to 18 years. Colin Robinson, the juvenile accomplice, received a 3-year term for helping the offenders and trying to hide the truth. Roger's aging mother was likewise unable to avoid accountability for perjury and giving her son a fake alibi. In retaliation against her own children, the woman was only granted a year of probation due to her senior age and severe health issues. Jacqueline persisted in ruining her family's lives while she was incarcerated. Everyone who knew her personally was relieved when she was put in jail, and she was upset that no one stood for her in court. According to her own mother, individuals such as Jackie ought to be permanently removed from society in order to prevent them from hurting others. It's interesting to note that Jacqueline destroyed all of her late husband's possessions and pictures a few days after the funeral, making the house completely devoid of any reminders of him. Somehow, Danielle was able to preserve a few pictures of her father. Her mother was unaware of them, and she kept them on her bedside table. Paul's children received the £300,000 in insurance settlement for which he was slain. Overnight, Danielle and Adam lost both of their parents, but their problems didn't stop there. Their mother was insistent that the children should not be raised by either her parents or the parents of the dead husband. The children were placed in foster care as a result of her efforts to deny them guardianship rights. Danielle was only 11 years old, and her brother Adam was only 5 years old when the tragedy occurred, even though they had living grandparents. From prison, Jacqueline tried to control her children while maintaining her parental rights. She specifically wanted them to use various forms of pressure to publicly declare her innocent. For instance, she said that if they came to see her in prison, she would sign off on their school trips. However, she misled them during the visit by refusing to sign the document and insisting they testify in her favor. Consequently, only the brother and sister were unable to accompany their class on weekend outings. Danielle is currently 31 years old, resides in Basingstoke, works at a daycare, and is seeing an engineer named Simon Bryce. Her 25-year-old brother relocated to London and has a decent degree. With Jacqueline's upcoming release next year, her adult children are extremely concerned that their mother would keep doing everything in her power to ruin their lives. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. In the case of Jenna Burley, she was discovered in a plastic container outside of town while attending a friend's birthday celebration. It's challenging to infer a stranger's motivations from their appearance or speech alone. At first glance, a stranger may appear well-groomed, act courteously, and offer assistance with the best of intentions. In actuality, though, these people are frequently the ones who lure their selected victim into a false sense of security so they can be robbed, abducted, exploited, or killed. Unfortunately, the victim frequently discovers they have slipped into a lethal trap too late. In 2017, the nation was stunned by the tale of Jenna Burley, a regular American student and well-known blogger. Thousands of people first joined the hunt for the missing girl in the hopes that she was still alive, but nobody could believe what had occurred when the horrifying truth was made public. This party ended up being the last night of the girl's life, even though she had only gone to celebrate her friend's birthday. The disaster resulted from a sad combination of drunkenness and the innocent desire to put his trust in a charming stranger who just so happened to offer his assistance. Jenna Burley was who? Born on November 4, 1994 in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania's capital, Jenna Nicole Burley is the second of Edward and Jacqueline Burley's 4 children. Her parents never left each other after they fell in love in the late 1980s while attending a Philadelphia university. The couple then got married in the fall of 1991, and their first child, a daughter called Janelle, was born in 1992. Our story's heroine was born 2 years later, and shortly after, their sons, Jeffrey and Jacob, came into the world. The Burley family was committed to serving others. Edward was working at a hospital that specialized in patient rehabilitation following illnesses and injuries, while Jacqueline worked in a nursing home. In an effort to provide the best for their kids, the parents brought them up in a loving and caring environment. Along with her siblings, Jenna always had a close relationship with her parents. She was raised as a vibrant, upbeat, and active young woman with a creative side, a lot of charisma and leadership abilities. She loved animals, did well in school, acted in the school theater from an early age, and always had many of friends. The family Burley was neither poor nor rich. They made their home in Philadelphia, in a large home in the peaceful, comfortable Harleysville area. Jenna became the life of the party, gained friends fast, and fit right in with any group. The girl, who was always trying out different appearances and styles and occasionally came across as very lavish, dreamed of becoming a fashion designer in high school. Jenna, who occasionally resembled a hippie and other times an emo subculture member, wore vibrant makeup, dyed her hair multiple colors, and wore her clothes in a variety of fashions. She pushed her pals to question the ordinary routine since she loved making a statement. The adolescent girl regularly went to concerts, fairs, and other large gatherings that provided her with inspiration. Burley's opinions and interests started to change as she approached her high school graduation. Instead of pursuing a career in fashion design, she suddenly envisioned herself in the film industry. She took workshops at a nearby film studio to learn how to make short films, and her talent was immediately apparent as she handled each plot and production step with originality. Jenna also created accounts on a number of social media platforms at that time, where she kept up with her pages and shared her interests in life, as well as her thoughts on a range of important societal topics. The senior in high school immediately had a sizable fan base, and her viewership expanded swiftly as well. Following this lively, artistic girl who was always experimenting with her appearance and inspiring others to embrace self-expression seemed to be enjoyable. Before she knew it, Jenna had gained a following of several thousand people and was a fairly well-known blogger. The 18-year-old recent high school graduate studied media arts at a prominent college in sunny Florida in 2013. The student continued to actively maintain and grow her blog while studying, sharing anecdotes about her experiences with significant injuries, protracted despair, parties, and other forms of entertainment with friends, her involvement in the community and school life. After just one semester of college, Jenna returned home on December 20, 2013 to spend Christmas with her family. The weather was severe, and snow had already fallen on Philadelphia at that point. Jenna wore utterly improper shoes and failed to account for the stark contrast from Florida, which led to her slipping and falling and severely breaking her ankle before she ever made it to the house. A double fracture with displacement was discovered by X-ray, necessitating surgery and the installation of specific pins and plates. Burley was literally confined to a wheelchair for several months, since she was unable to bear any weight on her foot. She then had to go to regular physiotherapy sessions and relearn how to walk. In this time frame, additionally, she contracted pneumonia, which made her recuperation much more difficult and time-consuming. The girl was quite disappointed that she had to take a leave of absence from school in order to concentrate on getting better. She only found comfort in social media, where Jenna engaged in active communication with her followers, and in her personal blog, where she shared excerpts from her ideas and journal entries. Nearly every day, Jenna uploaded new videos in which she addressed a variety of subjects and answered questions. She was an outspoken opponent of zoos, dolphinariums, and other establishments that keep animals in captivity and use them for entertainment. She also raised awareness of the challenging situation of the homeless, pointing out that those in warm, temperate regions had it much easier than those in Pennsylvania, where those without a roof over their heads run the risk of freezing to death on the streets. Additionally, Jenna, who was already actively involved in charitable work on a regular basis, started planning fundraisers to provide necessities to homeless and animal shelters. Jenna started creating her own jewelry while she was recovering, selling it online and giving away all the money to help those in need. She emphasized that what may appear to be junk filling a closet to some could be a true treasure to someone less fortunate, and she actively urged her followers to donate unwanted stuff to charity. Jenna ended up staying at home for over a year rather than just a few months because the recuperation process took so long. She enjoyed the puppy she got from a local shelter during this period, and she wrote about it on her blog every day, sharing tales of their daily adventures. However, despite her outwardly positive attitude, Jenna experienced a severe depressive episode in the fall of 2014. She openly acknowledged that she needed professional assistance from a psychiatrist because she was unable to manage on her own any longer. Speaking candidly about her struggles with mental health, Burley shared her doctor's advice and talked about the support she received from her family and pet. During this time, the blogger's following increased many times as a result of the fact that many young people could identify with the difficulties she detailed and appreciated her candor. Jenna traveled to sunny California in the beginning of 2015 with her father and younger brother Jacob. In her social media posts, Jenna expressed how much better she felt, and the joyful pictures taken from the beach made it obvious how close she was to her family, the everlasting student. Jenna chose to transfer to a school in her hometown rather than go back to Florida when she recovered completely and traveled with her family. She enrolled in Montgomery County Community College, a Philadelphia suburb, and decided to live at her parents' house. Burley, meantime, kept up her blog and created quick films on a variety of subjects. After graduating with a bachelor's degree in the humanities, Jenna made the decision to attend college, enrolling at Temple University's School of Film in 2017. Jenna decided to remain at her family's house rather than move into a dorm, because the campus was only a half-hour drive away. She no longer needed to rely on family members for transportation to class because she had upgraded her room and purchased her own vehicle by that point. Jenna was 4 to 5 years older than her peers when she started university, having already reached the age of 22. Still, they were in agreement, celebrating, going to concerts, hanging around, and having a good time. The birthdays of each other. It is important to note that Temple University, one of the biggest universities in the nation, is situated nearly in the heart of the city. There are a lot of stores, malls, eateries, bars, and other establishments all around the university. Thus, life is busy here. You could say that after lessons, students always have a place to unwind and rest. Jenna was involved in an automobile accident on her way to school a few days after classes started in late August. Her automobile was severely damaged, but luckily she was not hurt because she was wearing a seatbelt. From that point on, she was typically driven to school in the mornings by her father or one of her younger brothers. Sometimes, if Jenna stayed in the city late, she would spend the night at a friend's house, but she always told her parents in advance. Fatal mix-up on Wednesday, August 30, 2017. At the party, Davis, a close friend and classmate of Jenna's, was going to one of the bars to celebrate his birthday. Among those invited to the celebration was Jenna, who was expected to spend the night at the birthday boy's house in order to attend class with him on Thursday morning. To ease her parents' anxiety that night, she told them ahead of time. Taking pictures and sharing them on social media was a lot of fun for Jenna Davis and her 5 friends. As they went from bar to bar, They made new acquaintances who joined them, wishing the birthday boy a happy birthday and raising a glass to his good health. The gathering had altered considerably by 11 p.m., and everyone was in a rather inebriated state. It was around midnight when the buddies ended up in a crowded little sports pub. Because his buddies had planned a surprise for him, which involved kidnapping him and bringing him to another location, the birthday boy had moved aside. He told Burley about it and asked her to text him when she was going to be to his apartment so they could spend the night together. Jenna and the others remained in the pub. A couple students invited Jenna to stay at their house, and several sober drivers offered to drive her anywhere she wanted to go. However, Jenna said that she had previously arranged to visit Davis' home, but by 1 a.m, friends started to depart, and Burley was unaware that everyone who had offered her a ride or a place to stay had already vanished. A mix-up happened, with disastrous results. Until the very last minute, Jenna thought she would go with someone from the bar, so she bid her pals farewell and promised to remain a little while longer. She was seated at the bar with a bunch of strangers when she finally realized what was going on, and they quickly departed as well. When Jenna realized she was alone and that the bar was shutting at 2 a.m, she began messaging Davis to implore him to come get her. But the man didn't hear anything because he was asleep at home and his phone was in a different room. Jenna attempted to call some additional pals, but they were either not able to hear their phones or were too inebriated to answer. It didn't seem safe to stroll around the city alone at night, and she didn't want to disturb her parents. The student's disappearance. Upon checking his phone in the morning, Davis got extremely worried after initially believing Jenna had spent the night somewhere else. Jenna had sent him multiple messages and made 2 attempts to call him, requesting that he pick her up from the bar. The final message she sent was simply, "Help me." Her phone went off when he attempted to call her back. Burley never showed up to the university, but he still thought his friend was all well and would attend class as normal. None of the friends who had joined them at the bar the previous evening had hosted the student in the afternoon, so Davis called and paid them a visit. To find out if Jenna had come home, one of her pals called her parents. She recounted what had transpired after they said no, and Edward and Jacqueline hurried to the college in less than 30 minutes to discover out where and who had last seen their daughter. They talked to her pals. The Burleys went straight to the police to report their daughter missing after receiving no helpful information, requesting that a search be conducted right away. Jenna had sent numerous classmates notes requesting assistance, which added to the urgency of the situation. The academic buildings and dorms were the first locations examined, but the missing student was nowhere to be found. After that, the police called nearby hospitals, but no women who fit Jenna's description had been admitted in the previous 24 hours. The last time they saw the student was in the sports bar, according to everyone who had dealt with her the night before. She was dressed in blue pants and a motivational white t-shirt. She had a light blue hoodie knotted around her waist with a slogan on the front. Her long black hair, which was braided into 2 pigtails, was another distinctive characteristic. News of Burley's disappearance soon went viral on social media because she was a very well-known blogger. Thousands of her admirers sent messages requesting assistance in finding her and urging anyone with knowledge to come forward to the kind and tenacious stranger. The bartender instantly recalled the girl with the braids who stayed late after everyone else had departed when the cops came at the bar where the missing student was last seen. She appeared disoriented, was heavily intoxicated, and was phoning and texting all the time. Around 2 a.m, her phone signal was last picked up in the same neighborhood. We looked over the surveillance footage from the cameras inside the pub and at the entrance. Jenna was spotted by the cops sitting by herself at the bar, sipping a cocktail and messaging. A man came up to her at 1:30 a.m. Eastern, struck up a discussion, and then bought her a drink. Before they left the bar, they sat together for roughly 20 minutes. They were both strolling unsteadily as if they were really drunk, just before it closed. The bartender identified a frequent client right away and even named him Joshua Hupperters when he was shown the video and asked if he knew the man. The bartender claimed that Joshua was practically a daily visitor and that on the previous evening, he showed a special interest in the lonely beauty by purchasing her cocktails and continuously inviting her to his home. Joshua had just reached 29 when the authorities learned that he had previously attended Temple University but had taken a lengthy academic leave and never graduated. He lived only 5 minutes from the bar where he was spotted with Jenna, and he was always hanging out with students. He and his friend Jack Miley had a large apartment that he rented in a building across the street. When they finally got in touch with Joshua later that night, he said he had been so inebriated the previous evening that he had no recollection of a girl from the pub. He consented to be questioned, but shortly after, his phone was switched off, so the police went to Hupperter's flat to speak with him. Jack, the primary suspect, was at home and allowed the cops to enter without any problems. There was chaos in almost every room of the man's flat, which resembled a normal bachelor pad. Jack said that the previous evening, he and his companion had really gone to the sports bar and consumed a lot of alcohol. After Joshua picked up a girl, Jack made the decision to go home so they could have some solitude. According to Jack, he went straight to bed and didn't hear if he was alone or when his roommate returned home. Joshua was concerned when he abruptly began cleaning the kitchen the following day. He had a serious cut on his hand and new scratches on his face. Joshua described this as a regrettable mishap, stating that he had slipped into some bushes while intoxicated. After lunch, he vanished, leaving his phone off and taking some of his possessions with him without informing his friend of his whereabouts or the duration of his absence. The guys resided in a big apartment with a second exit that led to the backyard, which was unguarded. There was a roll of paper towels on a dresser, smeared with what appeared to be blood, and a pair of men's sandals beside the entrance with odd brownish stains. Additionally, the kitchen smelled strongly of cleaning supplies, and there were multiple empty cleaning product bottles lying about the floor. All of this sparked serious suspicions, and Joshua was subsequently regarded as the primary suspect in the student's disappearance case. When the authorities looked into Upper Terrace's past more, they found that he was born and reared in Philadelphia, and that he had experienced trauma from the early death of his father, who had been brutally murdered. Joshua attended Temple University until he was 29 years old, but he never received his degree. He has previously been involved in legal troubles for selling illegal narcotics to pupils. He had also been accused several times with assaults against women in an effort to force them into intimacy and had served several months for burglary. There was still no word on the whereabouts of the missing girl, and the search and initial questioning of the fugitive revealed that the suspect could be quite dangerous. After the FBI became involved in the inquiry, it was quickly established that Joshua's phone had last been in use in Wayne County, close to a lake approximately 230 miles north of Philadelphia. The fugitive may be hiding in the home of his grandmother, who was found to reside in the neighborhood. In fact, Hupperter's was captured at the home of his maternal grandmother. He didn't resist and seemed at ease. He insisted that he was intoxicated on the night of August 31 and, when questioned about the new injuries on his body, he reiterated the tale he had told his roommate Jack about falling into bushes. He gave an explanation for his abrupt departure, saying he wanted to spend the final weekend before courses began with his family. He became silent and wanted a lawyer when the police brought up the fact that they knew he was not enrolled in any university. Experts visited the Philadelphia fugitive's flat, meanwhile, discovered blood traces in the garbage can, on the floor, and in the plumbing. The prospect of finding the young girl alive was dwindling by the minute as they awaited the test results to identify whose blood it was. Along with over $20,000, 0 cents, in cash, many bags containing various illegal substances were discovered during the search of Joshua's room. The enigmatic container. Investigators kept searching Hupperter's house, including the garbage cans, which were fortunately still empty, and the backyard, which was reachable by the second door in the corner. A light blue hoodie, a slogan-emblazoned t-shirt, a sports bra, and a black hair tie with a few dark hairs were discovered inside a black bag. The clothes that were discovered in the trash were very similar to what Jenna was wearing on the day she vanished. Even worse, there were bloodstains on the objects, which made it look quite unlikely that the girl was still alive. Still, the suspect said nothing, and the hunt went on. Hupperter's stepfather suddenly called the police on September 2 to report that the man had visited his mother's Jenkintown home on August 31. He had arrived in a taxi with a heavy, large, opaque plastic container. Joshua clarified that it held his books as well as a few personal items. The following morning, he took another taxi and left the container at the garage. Given his stepson's criminal history, the stepfather thought this was suspicious because the container was abnormally weighty and had an odd smell. Without alerting his wife, the old man made the decision to call the police. Although he was unaware of Joshua's subsequent whereabouts, He overheard him requesting that the driver refrain from recording the journey on the app and pledging to pay with cash. By the time the stepfather, Hupperders, had been caught and a search of his grandmother's home had turned up nothing untoward, the gruesome discovery in the shed had been discovered. Authorities believed the enigmatic plastic container may have been sunk in a lake, but the container's destiny was still unknown. They thought about using divers to help with the search, but things took a surprising turn. Joshua discovered that the spouse of Joshua's grandmother had a little shed far from the home, almost obscured by trees and plants. Although he hadn't used them in a while, the man kept fishing equipment and an old boat there. He chose to inspect the shed on September 3 and discovered that the door's lock was broken. He went in fearing robbers, but everything was in its proper place, aside from an odd container that had never been there before. He flinched in terror when he opened the container. There found a young woman's naked, badly disfigured body inside. He reported the gory discovery to the police right away. The authorities summoned Burleigh's parents for identification after rapidly determining whose remains the retiree had discovered in his shed. When their greatest fears came true, Jenna's father almost suffered a heart attack and her mother passed out. By using surveillance footage and witness accounts at the crime scene, authorities were able to prove that Hupperders had enticed the already inebriated girl to his house after giving her more booze. As Jenna became aware of her situation, she was able to message a number of pals to ask for assistance, but none of them replied. Joshua tried to coerce the girl into intimacy in the flat, but she retaliated violently, scratching the criminal and severing his hand with a kitchen knife. But he beat her head repeatedly against the floor and was able to knock the knife out of her hand. After taking advantage of Jenna and rendering her incapable, he used his bare hands to strangle the poor girl. After that, he cleaned up the crime scene as best he could and put her body in a container he had discovered in the storage area. According to the autopsy, Jenna's death was caused by mechanics, asphyxiation. She had several bruises, abrasions, and even bite marks on her body. She also showed symptoms of personal assault and a traumatic brain damage. Her blood was discovered on the apartment's paper towels and shoes. The defendant's blood and semen were detected on her clothing, and her hair was on the hair tie in the garbage bin. Hupperders' guilt was never in question, but he refused to accept a plea bargain or acknowledge it during the trial and punishment. In addition, a backpack with his documents, money, and a few necessities was found during a search of his grandmother's home, suggesting that the offender had planned to escape but was apprehended just in time. Only a year and a half after the horrifying crime, in the spring of 2019, did the criminal and attacker's trial start. By asserting that the murdered girl had willingly entered Joshua's room and provoked him, the defense lawyers made a valiant attempt to place all the guilt on her. But everyone in the room was indignant at the defense's remarks. The defendant was found guilty on all counts following 9 days of hearings, and he was given a life sentence with the chance of release only after 60 years. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. At midnight on August 15, 2020 in Perth, Western Australia, the suburb was completely dark, with the only light coming from the streetlights flickering here and there along the deserted road. In the faint light of a solitary lamp, a home on the outskirts stood motionless and silent. Yet within, there was a muffled bustle. Loud shouts and weak shadows danced over the walls. It was more than just an argument. It was something ferocious, passionate, and disturbing, even primordial. The air was broken abruptly by a loud bang that sounded like something big hitting the wall. Then there was the clear sound of a gunshot. Time seems to stop. After that, there was a terrible quiet that enveloped the area outside the home like a dense fog. Not a soul could be seen. Although no one was around to see it, the gun's piercing crack shattered the silence of the night like a piece of glass. Perth police got a desperate contact to the emergency services just minutes after the gunfire. The shaky, terrified voice of a woman indicated that there had been a shooting and that someone had been hurt. "He is not moving. God, please assist." The woman's voice broke as she screamed. Officers showed up at the scene as soon as the dispatcher deployed a patrol unit. Minutes later, A woman standing on the front lawn, clearly shaken, was visible through the flashing lights. Her entire body was shaking uncontrollably. Her eyes were wide with fear and she was pale. The cops found the house in a state of turmoil. The body of 38-year-old James Watson was in the living room. His physique was contorted in an abnormal way. A black pool of blood had started to spread across the floor, and his eyes were wide open. The walls and furnishings were stained by the blood that seeped into the carpet. Signs of a scuffle were immediately observed by the cops. There were toppled chairs and obvious signs of impact on the walls and furniture. Before the gun was fired, the whole room was in a state of chaos, suggesting a violent altercation. A shotgun with its barrel aimed at the door was resting next to the body. Although there were no indications of forceful entry, it initially appeared as though someone had broken into the house. In order to gather evidence, officers roped off the scene and dispatched forensic and investigative teams. They could see that this was no ordinary crime. It was the result of something far more intricate. They identified the woman they discovered on the lawn as the wife of Catherine Watson James. The paramedics on the scene attempted to calm her down because she was in shock. When she was taken to the police station, she was too upset to talk clearly, and her hands were covered in blood. She was limited to saying, "I didn't mean to. I had no idea how it would turn out." Investigators started looking for solutions. Asking the neighbors questions was the first step. But before to the gunfire, nobody had heard anything out of the ordinary. Mark Ridley, an elderly neighbor, reported that he's seen Catherine and James coming home together that night. He didn't give it much thought, although they appeared nervous. His statement was removed by the police, although it yielded no important clues. In the meantime, forensic specialists inside the home discovered an unsealed envelope containing multiple documents and photos, adding to the mounting evidence that the conflict had begun long before the gunshot on the kitchen table. Upon closer examination, the investigators discovered that several of the photographs depicted intimate moments from the family's lives, even if they didn't initially appear to be very significant. These pictures might be the key to figuring out why the tragedy happened. Investigators tried to piece together what had happened that night. After a stressful dinner at a restaurant, Catherine and James went home at around 8 p.m. Nothing had foreshadowed the impending disaster, but the supper had been unpleasant, according to people who knew them. James said he had to go and take care of something at one point, but Catherine urged he stayed. She informed him that they needed to talk about something. Catherine recommended that they unwind with a drink and spend the evening in silence after they arrived home. Leaving James in the living area, she took the envelope and headed upstairs. James remained downstairs as if oblivious to what was about to happen. After a while, Catherine returned downstairs with the papers firmly grasped in her hands. She put the envelope on the table in front of him, her face expressionless, and waited for his response. James's face transformed when he saw the envelope. Despite his best efforts to maintain composure, the anxiety in the room was evident. Despite her silence, Catherine's expression spoke a lot. There was a thick quiet. Right at this point, everything changed. They got into a furious debate that swiftly turned into a yelling contest. At one point, Catherine refused to let go of the documents and clutched onto the envelope when James tried to retrieve it. A damaged chair appeared as detectives inspected the room where the shot was fired. Been employed as a weapon. Photographs and documents, some of them blood-stained, were scattered on the floor. Every piece of evidence suggested that James and Catherine were fighting over the documents. Investigators came to the conclusion that James was attempting to seize something from Catherine when the gun was discharged. Catherine had fired the shotgun, as evidenced by the marks on the carpet and the shotgun's location. Police discovered a number of fascinating things when they gained access to James and Catherine's phones. In contrast to his regular conduct, James had shut off his phone around 10:30 p.m. James had gone at that time, according to surveillance footage from a camera outside their home, but he returned 10 minutes later. It was still unclear what he accomplished in those brief minutes. Still in a state of shock when she was taken to the police, Catherine was unable to provide a detailed account of what had happened. She said that they had begun to argue and that things eventually got out of hand. She said she couldn't recall how she got the shotgun in her hands. Although it was evident that she was under a lot of stress, detectives felt that there was more to her story. Investigators started looking into the Watsons' relationship in further detail. The couple had been married for 10 years, didn't have any kids, and seemed to lead a peaceful existence. However, Catherine became suspicious when neighbors saw that James had been spending less time at home lately. Even close friends and neighbors had seen the strain in their conversations, while no one knew exactly what was going on between them. The inquiry also found that Catherine had gotten in touch with a private investigator only a week prior to the incident. It was unclear why this was the case. It was unclear exactly what she was looking into, but it was possible that she was obtaining evidence against her spouse. The results of the forensic examination of the weapon discovered at the scene were given to the police later that night. When James's fingerprints were found on the shotgun, they appeared strange, as if he had handled it just once. This made investigators question whether the firearm may have been utilized by someone else at the crucial moment. Perth police visited Catherine and James Watson's house again the morning following the incident. As investigators attempted to piece together a more coherent picture of what had happened, forensic teams continued to collect evidence at the crime scene, which remained sealed off. The specifics cast doubt on the simplicity of this narrative, which at first glance seemed to be a spontaneous flash of hostility during an argument. The investigation's main detective, Richard Hale, made the decision to go over the surveillance film once more to make sure nothing had been missed. There was a little discrepancy between the frames of the video, which showed James leaving the house at 10:30 p.m. and coming back 10 minutes later. He was seen talking to someone in a car parked by the curb in the video. The face of the person James was speaking to was indistinguishable from the shadowy figure that the camera captured. Hale started looking into who might have been outside the house at that time, after realizing that this might be a significant lead. Detectives kept questioning Catherine in the meantime, but her mental condition remained unpredictable. She asserted that everything happened too fast and that she couldn't remember how things got out of hand. She spoke incoherently, and her eyes were empty. When he questioned her about the car that was captured on the surveillance camera, Detective Hale saw a momentary shift in her demeanor, as though she was trying to conceal something. The contents of the envelope discovered at the side were being carefully examined by detectives at the same time. Indeed, a professional investigator had taken a number of the photos inside. James was pictured with a young woman, but her face was never fully visible. The investigators' report listed a number of locations where they had met, including a motel on the outskirts of the city, a shopping mall parking lot, and a cafe in downtown Perth. The report, however, omitted the woman's identity, although it was still unclear how these photos related to the crime. Hale came to the conclusion that Catherine had hired the private investigator to track her husband. Investigators chose to go to the private investigator's office, who was listed in the report. They discovered Thomas Morgan, a man who appeared a little uncomfortable when he saw the detectives. According to Morgan, Catherine had called him approximately 2 weeks earlier, claiming that her husband had been acting strangely. She had a suspicion that he was cheating, but she didn't elaborate. Copies of the images captured over the course of a week of monitoring were presented to the police by Morgan. Although the woman's face was always obscured, it was evident from the photos that James and the woman were meeting. She was either turning away or wearing a hood. Morgan stated that just one day before to the terrible incident, he had given Catherine all of the collected material. After returning to Catherine, Detective Hale showed her the pictures that the private investigator had taken. She acknowledged that she had suspected James of being unfaithful, but her response was cold. She stated that in order to learn the truth and determine the course of their marriage, she planned to present him with the proof during a family meeting. She insisted, nevertheless, that she never intended to hurt him. After James saw the pictures and accused her of spying on him, things became out of hand for her. Although she couldn't recall the specifics, she said the debate escalated into a physical altercation and ultimately the fatal shooting. The forensic results of the fingerprints found on the shotgun were given to detectives as they attempted to ascertain whether Catherine's story was accurate. Forensic specialists concluded that although James's prints were on the gun, they had been there long before the shot was fired. Catherine had maintained that she had never touched the rifle and that it was kept in the house for safety. Since this claim ran counter to the forensic results, detectives started to believe that the weapon had been tampered with in an effort to deceive the authorities. One of the most important pieces of evidence was the security film showing James conversing with someone in a car. In an attempt to identify the license plate of the car and determine who might have been outside the Watsons' house that night, Detective Hale forwarded a copy of the video for additional examination. Detectives looked through Catherine and James's phone logs in anticipation of the results, hoping to find further hints. They learned that Catherine had texted her sister Lisa multiple times the night of the event. Suspicions were raised by the message's content. They appeared to be attempts at justification or explanation. "I didn't intend for things to go this way," one message read. Another included a meeting request. Hale was concerned since Lisa had not responded to these texts. In order to learn whether she was aware of what had happened that evening, he made the decision to summon her in for interrogation. Lisa looked uncomfortable when she got to the station. She acknowledged that although she hadn't spoken to Catherine the night of the event, she had done so the day before. They had talked about an impending family get-together, Lisa said. She claimed to have been at home all evening and to have no knowledge of what had transpired. Her apprehensive manner and tentative responses, however, gave the detectives cause for concern. Hale made the decision to confirm her alibi by looking through her location information and phone records. The results of the surveillance video analysis were given to investigators while the interrogation went on. Lisa was the owner of the license plate on the vehicle, parked outside the Watsons' residence. Their suspicions were aroused by this information, so Hale altered his questioning strategy throughout the interrogation and asked Lisa pointed questions regarding her whereabouts that evening. She initially attempted to justify her actions, but under duress she eventually acknowledged that she had been outside the house when James left. However, her reasoning was unclear. She never got out of the car, saying she had come to speak to her sister but left when she saw James. Hale was aware that something wasn't right. He went back to looking through Lisa's phone logs and found that the night of the event, she had gotten a message from James to come over right away. However, what could James have been talking about in private? And why would he phone Lisa when he was meant to be with Catherine? Another important piece of evidence was discovered by forensic specialists in the bedroom where Catherine claimed the argument started. Blood traces that did not belong to Catherine or James were found on the door handle. Detectives began to think that a third party had been involved in the fight as a result of this. Lisa's blood was identified through a DNA study. Despite Lisa's prior protestations, investigators now obtained evidence that she had been inside the residence. Lisa was presented with the fresh proof by the police. She attempted to excuse herself by saying she had simply come to keep Catherine safe, but she became alarmed and attempted to flee as James and Catherine began to argue. She maintained that she didn't know who fired the gun and had nothing to do with the crime. But as the interrogation went on, her tale became more complicated. Investigators were starting to feel that Catherine and Lisa could be concealing something. There were still too many unresolved problems, but they had a notion that James's potential affair might have led to a dispute between the sisters. Hale made the decision to temporarily release Lisa, requesting that she stay in town. He had the feeling that the mystery was almost solved, but that one crucial piece of information was still lacking to reveal the whole truth of that evening. Detective Richard Hale and his colleagues went back to the Watson residence the next day to conduct a more comprehensive examination. It became evident with every fresh clue that this was no ordinary crime. Hale believed that there was much more going on here than a tragic family dispute. Once more, the cops searched every room for information that could help them solve the case. They looked carefully at the pictures in the envelope. Although the woman's face was obscured and blurry in the private investigators' images that Catherine had commissioned, the detectives thought they were essential to the motivation. Because they were unable to identify her with certainty, this made the inquiry more difficult. Hale made the decision to re-interrogate Lisa, this time as a possible suspect rather than a witness, while the forensic team carried on with their investigation. Lisa agreed to cooperate despite her anxious appearance. Hale decided to present in a more straightforward manner. Given the blood analysis results on the door handle, he questioned her about why, if she had stated she never left her car, her blood was discovered inside the residence. Lisa attempted to clarify once more, but her responses lacked conviction. Although her explanation looked tenuous, she implied that she might have unintentionally scratched herself as she entered the residence. Though he was positive there was more to her story than she was revealing, Hale opted to give her some time after realizing that pressing any farther would not be fruitful. Investigators examined Lisa and James's phone logs in the interim. James had sent Lisa a number of texts shortly before he passed away, which they discovered. One text said, "Come over immediately," while another gave the meeting place. Hale thought James had a feeling something catastrophic was going to happen because of the frantic, almost desperate tone of the communications. He gave his staff instructions to look more closely at their previous exchanges to determine whether any encounters or messages were comparable. Investigators also started looking through James's social media and email accounts, discovering a series of exchanges between James and Lisa that went back several weeks. During these conversations, James and Lisa talked about some important actions that needed to be done immediately. The messages alluded to a strategy, but they were ambiguous. Hale began to piece together that James and Lisa's relationship went beyond a simple familial tie. Catherine continued to feel stressed as the investigation progressed. In an effort to shed further light on what had happened that evening, detectives made the decision to question her again. Catherine was hesitant to talk about her sister when Hale started inquiring about her connection with Lisa. Although they had been close, she said that in recent months their relationship had soured. Although Catherine didn't elaborate, she did imply that there had been disagreements in their family, not all of which had to do with James seeing an opening. Hal put more pressure on Catherine, asking if she was aware that James had been seeing Lisa. She didn't respond when he showed her the messages on James's phone. She stated that she was unaware of these meetings, and that the only reason she had a suspicion was that James might be disloyal to Lisa, but not to another woman. Hale recognized then that either Catherine was purposefully concealing the truth, or she really didn't know anything. The detectives changed their emphasis and chose to look into Lisa's house. After obtaining a search warrant, they went to her home to collect additional evidence. They discovered a notebook including notes from phone conversations and meetings with James throughout the search. Names, dates, and places were listed, including the residence of Catherine and James. This demonstrated that Lisa might have been organizing her visits in addition to being aware of James's every move. Hale started to believe Lisa was a major contributor to what had occurred. After more investigation, a picture of Lisa and James together at the beach was found in Lisa's home. They looked really close, and the photo seemed to be fresh. This turned into a crucial lead. Hale now understood that James and Lisa were in a romantic connection, one that Catherine had purposefully disregarded or had not detected. In the meantime, forensic specialists finished examining the shotgun. Lisa's fingerprints were found on the weapon, according to the results, but they were left behind after James's. Because of this, investigators concluded that Lisa handled the shotgun after James had already suffered injuries. Hale started to worry that Lisa might have altered the scene of the crime in order to deceive the investigators. Investigators also discovered video from a hotel where James and Lisa had first met. Before Lisa departed and James remained, the footage shows them conversing and debating things. Their close-knit conduct was another evidence of a relationship that Catherine was not aware of. The idea that Lisa and James were part of something more complex and that their covert relationship had been a significant factor in the events leading up to that terrible night was reinforced by this. Hale made a snap decision. Calling Lisa back to the station, he showed her the additional evidence: photos, videos, and fingerprints. This time, Lisa made an effort to maintain her composure, but she broke under strain. Indeed, she had been seeing James behind Catherine's back, she acknowledged. She clarified that she never meant to ruin her sister's marriage, but that their affair had begun more than a year prior. Everything was kept under wraps until Catherine hired a private investigator after she started to suspect James of adultery. Hale persisted, inquiring as to what Lisa and James had talked about that evening. According to Lisa, James had requested a meeting to discuss the best way to tell Catherine the truth. However, things rapidly spiraled out of control. She acknowledged that she hadn't meant to meddle when she had entered the residence, but when she went inside after hearing the yelling, she discovered Catherine and James struggling. She claims that she attempted to stop them but was unable to do so in time. Investigators started confirming her account, but every piece of evidence suggested Lisa was inside the house when the crime was committed. Her presence was verified by fingerprints, blood analysis, and surveillance footage. Comments: it was still unclear if she was a direct participant in the altercation or just a bystander. Hale, however, was positive that she was concealing more than she was admitting. Investigators looked into James and Lisa's financial records in the interim. They learned that James had made a sizable transfer to Lisa's account just prior to the incident. The cause for it was still unknown, although it appeared to be payment for something. Hale started to believe Lisa was part of a bigger scheme, possibly even planning the crime. The forensic squad gave cops a breakthrough later that night. In the bedroom of Catherine and James, they had discovered Lisa's phone concealed beneath the mattress. The detectives' suspicions were validated when they discovered text messages on the phone. James and Lisa had been preparing to attack Catherine and set her up for it. Various aspects of the plan were covered in the communications, but for some reason, things didn't work out as planned. Hale ordered Lisa to be detained after realizing they had enough evidence to arrest her. Later, when she was being questioned, she backed into a corner and acknowledged that there had been a plot. She said that if she didn't assist James in getting rid of Catherine, he would expose her. She maintained, though, that the gunshot was an accident and that she never meant for things to escalate to this point. Hale was aware that he was getting close to cracking the case, but there was still a crucial question. If Lisa and James had conspired to plot everything, why did it go wrong, and who actually fired the shot? Detective Richard Hale believed that the puzzle was finally coming together. But there was still a critical point that needed to be answered. Why had James and Lisa's plan failed? And who had actually pulled the trigger? Although Lisa's confession and the evidence gathered suggested a plot, the specifics were still unknown. Lisa insisted throughout the interrogation that she was not involved in the crime and never meant to hurt James. She attempted to persuade the cops that their initial strategy was only to fabricate an event to give the impression that Catherine had assaulted James. However, she claims that as things got out of hand, she was left on the sidelines, not knowing what to do when the conflict started. Even though Hale paid close attention, he could sense that Lisa was still hiding something. He made the decision to do a last examination of the case in order to piece together the whole series of events that transpired that evening. To make sure they hadn't missed anything, the detectives went back to the Watson residence and meticulously went over the surveillance tape and the crime scene. Forensic specialists discovered a little but important hint on the shotgun during the re-examination that had previously gone overlooked. Tests on a piece of hair discovered beneath the stock showed it belonged to Catherine. Hale hesitated at this revelation. Before or immediately after the shot was discharged, Catherine might have held the gun. It also clarified the confusion in her account. Perhaps she simply was unable to recall the events of those pivotal moments when emotions were running high. The cops also looked through Catherine's pre-shooting phone logs. They learned that she had booked a private investigator and set up a meeting for the following day. This demonstrated her sincere desire to address the matter and perhaps make James responsible for his adultery. But why had things turned tragic if she had such intentions? Hale made the decision to go over Catherine's remarks again. He wanted to know if she had been part of the conflict or if she had been deceived. He started asking her more pointed questions right away, but Catherine insisted she couldn't remember the specifics. She explained that she and James got into a fight and that he attempted to steal the envelope containing the pictures from her. Everything happened too quickly, and then everything simply vanished. Detectives discovered a surveillance camera in the living room that they had previously overlooked as the inquiry went forward. The case took an unexpected turn when it was discovered that James had installed the camera himself. James and Catherine were seen fighting on the video. Lisa's voice could be heard even though she wasn't on camera. She was telling James to stop and that they needed to find a peaceful solution. There was a violent altercation when Catherine pushed James aside when he attempted to take the envelope from her. Catherine lost control of the situation, as seen on the video. Lisa rushed into the room to try to break up the fight as James seized her wrists. Despite placing herself between them, she managed to hold the shotgun. She seemed to want to defuse the situation, but it didn't work out that way. The pivotal moment was caught on camera when Lisa accidentally pointed the shotgun toward James in an effort to frighten him while she was in a panic. The gun went off as James made a quick movement. Lisa stood motionless, but Catherine fell to the ground. She gazed at James, who was lying on the ground, still holding the shotgun, for a few seconds. Her expression twisted in sheer horror. She dropped the weapon slowly and sprinted out of sight. Shocked and shaking, Catherine slowly stood up and urgently called emergency services. She spoke in a scared, tremulous voice. Detective Hale instantly realized what had happened. Lisa had fired the gun in a moment of utter terror, perhaps without even recognizing what she was doing, as she was stuck in the heart of the growing fight. When the situation reached a breaking point, James and Lisa's plan to conduct an attack and hold Catherine accountable had failed. The disaster was unavoidable since Lisa lost control due to her overwhelming anxiety. Hale made the decision to charge Lisa with involuntary manslaughter in order to wrap up the case. She sobbed and insisted that she never meant to hurt anyone, but there was no denying the proof. Although her actions were motivated by panic, the investigators acknowledged that she had known she was carrying a gun and had the option to not use it. Catherine was still in disbelief after discovering the whole truth. She understood that her sister was the one who had eventually caused James's death, not just a co-conspirator. Catherine agreed to cooperate with the inquiry, despite her grief, giving the authorities all the evidence they needed to close the case. Lisa ultimately entered a guilty plea in court and received a 6-year prison sentence for conspiracy to stage a crime and involuntary manslaughter. Determined to move on from the awful events that had permanently changed her family's lives, Catherine left Perth to begin a new life. None of the players had anticipated how the narrative would conclude. Deception, manipulation, and covert activities culminated in a disaster brought on by bad choices and a loss of control. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.